And we were lucky enough to have my boss, a 3-star general, a guy by the name of Gerald Goodfellow, that was kind enough to hear us out on this. By this time, I had an understanding of what we wanted to do. And he was visionary enough that he says, okay, go ahead, do it, build it. And what we built is what we call an integrated learning environment. And, our idea was that we would build an environment where people could learn in all kinds of different ways. So one of the so basically this integrated learning environment consisted, and we're going to show you a film here that will hopefully do a better job than I'm going to do here in this moment, but I do want to talk about it a little bit. We built an environment that actually that you could do a whole bunch of things from. So for instance, we wanted to build an environment where you could simply and easily and intuitively deliver curriculum. The thing that we decided that the tool we decided we wanted to deliver that curriculum on ended up being basically the edX platform, and we built our own site because we wanted to integrate it in some ways where the online site wouldn't let us. So we actually own our own edX site. We call it AU edX, but really it's just a curriculum delivery platform. Then we knew we needed to be able to collaborate, both in the kinds of ways that you collaborate on Facebook and the ways that you collaborate on, say, collaboration platforms where you're sharing files or you're able to chat or do video teleconferencing, these kinds of things. We wanted to be able to do that. We also wanted to be able to, take our students into environments like this, the metaverse, or these 3D and 2D worlds, and actually, do things just like we're doing here right now, but also design experiences for them. And I was in the beginning, I will tell you, this is the piece of it that I was most interested in. And really, I was most interested in it because of my experience at the Army War College. I'd come to realize in my couple of years of teaching there that typically I would have a pretty smart student. The Army tends to send a little bit older guys, so there was a whole bunch of Army colonels and some lieutenant colonels in the classroom that had been around for usually 20 plus years in the Army. And to get to that level and actually get selected to go to that war college is quite an achievement, and they tend to send some really smart people. And as I started teaching these people, every day we would have a number of pages, that we'd have them read before they came into class. And, it might be 50 to 100 pages typically. And what I realized is there was some portion of the student population, even in my own class, and I really stressed the need to read, that in fact would come to class and they hadn't done the reading beforehand. And they would actually come to class and they would listen and they would get from others, as much as they could without reading anything. And, I used to get a little, for lack of a better term, a little upset with some of them. And I'd say, look, we need you to come in prepared to have the discussion as well. You just can't pick off the minds of the people who've done the reading. We need you to have done it. And as hard as I tried, I wasn't successful at times getting some of these people to actually do the readings. But these same people, I realized almost without exception, these people who didn't, take in information very easily through the written word, these are the same people who had, they deployed, 6 times to maybe even a dozen times, to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and they'd led troops and they'd had great success. And often, what they would give to the seminar that they were in is they would bring up experiences that were related to the things we were talking about, which in fact was valuable. But even though they hadn't read, they had these great experiences. And I started to think, man, these people are really just experiential learners. They learn through experience, so when I started, and I actually probably even had some thoughts as far back then is, wouldn't it be neat if you could design experiences? I wasn't thinking of designing like 3D experiences, but I was thinking about, if you could design, wargaming experiences or, training experiences or whatever that could actually get people, some of the educational things that you would need. So when I get introduced to what some of the people here who had been doing, just a very small group of them, like I said, really just 4 people, had been doing with regard to some of these experiences in these 3D worlds, I got very interested because I realized this is just the way that a significant number of people learn. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's been my experience. It's a significant percentage of them. So I got very excited about that. So with that kind of as a backdrop, we started building an integrated learning environment that would do all those things that we wanted to do. Deliver curriculum, allow people to collaborate, have some 2D and 3D capabilities. And also we wanted to capture data as well as people were doing these things. And it kind of has dawned on me later that it probably should have, considering all the time Andy Scribner spent talking to me about it. The real prize in all of this is probably the data, because once you have the data, you can mine it and discover things from it, and actually get to a point of wisdom in the data, and actually design better educational ways for people, be it the written word or be it an experience, I guess. So we worked really hard for about 6 months and built this environment. In fact, a prototype environment. In fact, I think we built it all in about 5.5 months, if I'm not mistaken. And at some point, we decided we had it close enough that we wanted to start experimenting with it in our school. So we basically, unleashed it in our school. And I will tell you, I gave some initial direction on this. I said, look, I want to take at least 5 things that we're doing in this school in the traditional educational sense, and I want to move them into the integrated learning environment. And we're not going to move anything if we don't believe once we moved it and are going to present information that way or do things that way, we won't move anything unless it's going to be as good as we're currently doing, or in fact better. So that became kind of the mantra. People even started teasing me a little bit about it. Is this as good as or better? Good as or better became kind of our mantra. But what we ended up doing is very early on we ended up moving some real significant portions of our curriculum to include what I would consider our foundational course, which is called the Full Range Leadership Model, into this integrated learning environment. And people started using it, and we started having real success. And we went through a couple of classes and believed we had gathered enough data through various methods, all the way from surveys to just things that people didn't even know we were collecting. We believed that we had enough information that, and enough proof of concept that we needed to start briefing, we needed to start briefing this to the other, to other people around Air University. So I have just one of the colleges at Air University, but there's really about, there's really about 5 major colleges here, and we wanted to show them what we were doing. We first went back to the boss that had told us to go, my 3-star general boss, Gerald Goodfellow, and showed him what we had done, and he was very excited. He's a guy who gets it very quickly, and he was like, okay, I really do want you to go brief this to all the deans of the other school. I want them to see this. And so in fact we went out and started doing that, and have actually done that over the last couple of months, and to not great effect, if you want to be honest. We were, for some reason, what we were doing, even though we were able to show them things that we were doing in edX and in XOR collaboration platform, and even in these 2D and 3D worlds, there would be appreciation of what we were doing, but people weren't coming out of those briefings and saying, oh, I could take these things these guys are doing, and I can utilize it to to get my own students to a point of deeper learning. And it was a little bit frustrating to, I think, all of us. And but again, these are how you learn things, I guess. Sometimes you got to just chew on them a bit. And I'll tell you, 2 weeks ago something happened, and that was our public affairs people here in the Air Force had got word of some of the things that we were doing, and they'd asked us to come in and brief them. So they came in and we briefed them, and at the end of that brief, I think we all were sitting around and we realized it really, again, we had it hadn't resonated in the way that we wanted it to. People really didn't get, the potential of what we were doing. And, there was an epiphany, and I guess the epiphany came from me, actually, this time, which doesn't very often happen with a group of people I work with. They usually get it before I do. But in this case, I realized that we had been focusing on the wrong things in our briefings, the things we've been telling people. we had come in and we had told people, here is a tool, that we call edX. It's all about delivering curriculum. And here's how we use edX to deliver curriculum. And, here's how we use and here's a 3D world. And here's some of the things we're doing in a 3D world. And so we showed them all these tools that we had, but we didn't ever give them the why. Why are we doing this? And we tried to explain, but we just weren't doing it well. And we realized at that point, and like I said, I don't know how the epiphany came, it just came, that what we were showing them was the tools, but what the real magic of what we were doing wasn't the tools themselves. It was really the learning analytics, the lessons that could be gauged from what we were doing in these environments. Especially with this idea of the Internet of Things, which was actually a new concept to me until just this year. But really the secret sauce to what we were doing is pulling all this stuff together and being able to get be able to collect data and actually go from the data to information to knowledge to actual wisdom. And then using what we learned to design greater educational experiences, or using what we learned for even bigger things than just education. And so we flipped our entire briefing and we started with that. We started with the big concept, this concept that we had really just steered away from because we thought it was too big for many of the people that were just kind of seeing it for the first time for them to understand. And we took a real gamble a couple of days ago. We created this briefing. We did an upfront video that we did a video that tried to explain this up front. And we had my boss's boss come in. He's a MAGCOM commander. He's in charge of all the education training in the Air Force. He's a commander of Air Education Training Command, a guy by the name of Gerald Robertson. We brought him in, and we knew that if usually you wouldn't test something like this on your boss's boss, but as we looked at what we had done, we thought we actually had it. We had it to a point where we believed we could show the why of this, and then show what we had done in a way that would really cause him to get it. And we figured if we could, because he's probably the same kind of technology guy as I am at heart. I sense he might be, but I figured if we could actually deliver it to him, we actually might have something. The very brilliant guy, by the way, but again, probably not a guy who's thinking on, educating in these kinds of ways. So earlier this week, we had the privilege of briefing him, and we started that briefing off with a little 5-minute video. And then we showed him our tools. We showed him, some of the things we're doing in these 3D worlds, multiplayer educational role-playing games, single-player educational role-playing games. We showed him the different platforms and gave him some testimonials, and it really worked out for us. I thought this story might resonate with some of you that might struggle in your own environments on, the people you're working with that, you're not able to communicate with them on the real, benefits of what you're doing. So, with that, and, I talked this over. I asked Andy if this would be something that he thought a group, like you that has been thinking these ways in ways much longer than I have, if it would be valuable to him. He thought it would be. So we'll show you the film, and then we'll maybe continue the discussion after that. I'd be really interested in your thoughts on the things I've just said, and even your thoughts on this film if we're getting it there. So, Andy, with that, let's play the film, and then maybe we can just enter into some dialogue. Andy, do you have anything you want to add, by the way?
Oh, great. Well, I think after folks see the film, sir, there'll be probably a pretty good discussion from there. So I'm going to go ahead and get the film loaded up here for those who are in the PC environment. You can see it through the viewer here. If you're on a Mac, you can see it through a link that we'll post in the chat window. And we'll get it started here so that each of you can watch it.
Hey, I apologize for that. We had a delay. We were still going through the YouTube feed there. And
Okay.
this should probably be working a little bit better now. How about I just open it up and see if there's any questions that anybody has for us people who've been working this here at Squadron Officer College, and between all of us, we might be able to give you some intelligent answers.
General Goodfellow, what do you mean by an integrated learning environment? I mean, you mentioned games and you mentioned the data, but what are you doing with it?
Is this Cynthia?
It sure is.
Yeah, Cynthia. So let me, I don't know if you're asking because you actually wanted to know, or kind of for some other members of the group, but I'll tell you the way I look at it. What I want to, so we have all of these different capabilities, mainly these three capabilities we talked about, and I think that's most everything we would need, in education that isn't just somebody standing live in the classroom talking, or some activity that's being done, with actual human interaction. And so, beyond the traditional education, what we want to be able to do is we want people to be able to, wherever they are, that they can go in and they can, be reading curriculum or watching a video that's on edX, or reading our curriculum that we put on edX. And they can just as quickly transfer from that environment, regardless of their location. They can transfer into, say, a 3D world, and meet up with people who are reading the same kinds of things and have discussions. And they're not waiting for the schedule to happen. Groups can just naturally form, and it's integrated. It's transparent, and like I said, the main thing is that it can really happen anytime, any place, anywhere, I guess, and and it doesn't stop. And so it's an environment where this can just always go on. Cynthia, did that answer what you're looking for?
Yes, it did. Thank you. Any
Okay,
other
thanks.
questions?
Andy, I bet you have some thoughts on that are smarter than mine.
No way, sir.
Tuya, you can go ahead and ask, or you can send it through me. Either way. This is Lear. So Tuya, if you have a question, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Has this environment and technology allowed you to work with groups other than American military groups, like allies and people from client countries and like that?
While General Goodfellow is responding to that, Tuya, I'll step in for just a moment. And many of you know that I'm from Colorado Technical University, and I work with lots of different groups. What's wonderful about Air University and Squadron Officer College is they welcome people from all walks of life to collaborate.
Yeah, and I will tell you, my thought is that as this thing gains traction, we'll use it with all kinds of allies. We'll use it with all kinds of different people. Now, there's an interesting thing that happens at Squadron Officer College is for about half of our classes every year, we have officers from foreign countries. So I believe in the last class, for instance, we had 32 international officers from 14 different countries that came to our school, and we taught them. And in fact, just because they're here, they're actually in these environments working. Now, ideally, we would hope that those people, one of the things I really like is the connections that start here don't have to die here. So I'll share with you, I always tease it. There might be a great myth at Squadron Officer College when somebody will say, hey, what's the greatest thing you get at Squadron Officer College? You know, in the past, and we've been saying it since I came here myself as a student 20 years ago, that we develop all these connections, you know, with the people that, you know, are in our seminars and our flights with us. Well, typically you only have like 14 officers in a flight. And what's interesting is, so I came here 20 years ago, and of the 14 people that are in my flight, and I'm pretty much a people person, but of those 14 people that were in my flight, me and 13 others, I keep in contact with exactly 0 of them today. And as I've talked to my peers, you know, people along the way, and even to the people that are going through today, I think this is largely the case. We talk about the value of that all the time, but when they leave here, it often, I think, goes away. So, for instance, in our collaboration environment, I have a dream, and I think it will actually come to light. In fact, we've used this with some of our think tank groups, that we bring people from across the organization together to do some thinking on a hard question, and they've used some of our collaboration tools. And so we know already that some of those groups that formed up that weren't in their flights together are still collaborating on different, you know, on different questions now, even after they've left SOS. My hope would be that, you know, you would end up being able to collaborate and keep these relationships going, you know, in these environments, you know, after you leave. Wouldn't it be neat? I look at what's going on here today. I think how cool it would be if, you know, 6 months after somebody left Squadron Officer College, that they invited people that they had met, you know, back into an environment like this to have a discussion on some big question that they have discovered interests them all because they've been talking about it, you know, via social media or in different environments, and, you know, they all get together and talk just like we are, and that would go on all the time. And you know, I guess that's what I mean by the forever. Just some quick thoughts I have on the question asked.
Any other questions?
I guess I have a question for anybody in the group that might have some thoughts. So we've just kind of described the kind of things we're doing here, and I know that there's those of you, I know that somebody said that they've taught like 48 classes in these environments. And after hearing the story that I shared, do you have similar experiences, and how might some of you overcome some of these experiences where, you know, it's just the technology people that are interested in what you're doing? We've had success here at Squadron Officer College. I can't tell you how many people have like created a new class using edX, and they're so excited that they have created a new class that, in fact, now we're using we're now using, you know, to teach our students here. And they were not curriculum developers before. All they were they were people that basically delivered curriculum that was developed for them. And all of a sudden they have ownership of their curriculum, and they feel like they can have impact. And they all, when we've had them stand up and talk to people about it, they always do the same kind of thing I do here. They go, look what I built, and look how grand it is for the education, you know, of my students. And I'm not a technology person, they'll say. You know, but the common man, the common lady is using this technology today to great effect in our education environments. Anyway, any other people have stories like that?
I thought it might be interesting if you shared your experience at one of the events where you were standing up as an avatar. Dr. Nancy Sherman mentioned earlier that this is a new experience for her, and I thought I'd shared that, you know, you had a kind of an interesting effect on you after you'd been here for the first time and were standing, and how you felt the need to move over to where a chair was.
Sure, Andy. I'll tell you. You know, many times as we've been on this journey, and me being maybe the most novice person on the journey, although the commander tried to lead it a little bit, it's been interesting. But, you know, I've had these kind of neat experiences, and one of them that I share when we're talking to people about it is in one of these global learning forums several months ago, Nancy was presenting, And I had just been sitting there, literally standing right next to her, listening to her. And, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes had gone by where she was talking. And, I'm just sitting here in my chair looking at my computer, but I had, I guess, become my avatar, because it went through my mind as, heck, I've been standing here a long time. There's a chair right next to me. And so I went over there with my avatar and I sat down and I said, oh my goodness, what just happened to me? I literally transferred to the avatar. And even though I've been sitting down in real life the entire time, I had that mental thought as I've been standing here a long time listening, I need to sit down. I'm sure all of you have experienced things like that, but for me, that was kind of a neat moment.
It's funny though how the mind adapts to these kinds of environments in such a way that you have a suspension of disbelief.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions or thoughts, how about I turn it back over to the moderators, and I'm just interested in hearing what continues from this point.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Jenna, very much. What we have coming up is Dr. Art Langer from Columbia University, and he's got a fascinating discussion of the work that has been underway with him and Lee Kneffenkamp there at Columbia. I'm going to just give a little brief introduction to Dr. Langer. He's a person of many talents, so I just wanted to share that because he brings a wealth of different life experiences. But right now, he's an executive director of innovation design and a senior lecturer in technology management and interim program director of the Executive Master of Science in Technology Management at Columbia University. So that sounds like a pretty big job. But he also serves on the faculty of the Department of Organization and Leadership and the Graduate School of Education, which is known there at Columbia as Teachers College. He's also an elected member of the Executive Committee of the Columbia University Faculty Senate. I can imagine what a job that might be there, as it is with any university. And he's also an author of a recent book, The Strategic IT Best Practices for Managers and Executives. It's a great book. I highly encourage people to check it out. He's also wrote a guide to software development, designing and managing the life cycle, information technology and organizational learning. That's one of my favorites. Analysis and design of information systems and applied e-commerce and the art of analysis. He's just so broadly published, and you can check out these publications of his on the internet. He's also published numerous articles and papers related to service learning for undeserved populations. He's written on IT organizational integration, mentoring, and staff development. And as many of you know, there is such an important need to address these populations. He consults also in his spare time with corporations and universities on information technology. He's very sought after to consult on staff development, transformational initiatives, and curriculum development spanning the globe. He's the chairman and founder of Workforce Opportunity Services and a nonprofit venture that provides scholarships and careers to underserved populations around the world. And I tell you, when I've heard Dr. Langer share the work in that direction, I'm just very inspired for the lives that he has touched and will continue to touch in the future. And it's with great honor for us to introduce Dr. Langer. Dr. Langer, it's all yours.
That's locked. Hello? Can you hear
Yep.
me? Okay, we got it done. Sorry, I was getting nervous there. This technology stuff will get you every time. Well, thank you, Andy, for that great introduction, and I'm really excited, as always, to to be engaged with Air University and all of the people and all of the guests that we have today. And one of the things that I want to talk about today is the work that myself and Lee Kneffelkamp have done over the last 15 years in really taking on the issue of technology maturity, and we've seen this grow in importance, particularly over the last 5 years. And a part of our discussion today is really on selfhood ethics and literacy development. And and really what this is about is how do we know as educators whether or not the people that we are developing across various levels understand how to work in a virtual world. It's as simple as if I were to be giving a speech in front of a class versus giving it over the internet. And at what point, what is the maturities of that? What is, how do we deal with communicating with people? If you look at a lot of our young people today, they will tend to text people all the time. But sometimes walking over and talking to somebody face to face is more effective, and still at other times picking up the phone and calling them. And what we're finding in the research that we have done, which I'll talk about today, is that a lot of the individuals that are going through our educational systems are coming out maybe very advanced in technology, but not necessarily mature in the ways of using it, and in particularly in terms of the ethics and digital literacies, and most important in terms of the way we see ourselves and the way we come across. So today I'm speaking to you, but I don't see any of you. I sort of have a relationship using this virtual world, but it's not quite the same as it would be if you were sitting in front of me and I was able to see your body language and other types of things. And so the real issue of today's conversation is the technology arc that we developed provides a way of measuring that and determining it across a broad range of different sectors or dimensions, which can complete a person's readiness to really perform in many different aspects in today's very complex world that is changing all the time. And we certainly see how that's affecting the armed forces, how it is affecting professional worlds, education, across the board. So, and certainly feel free to ask any questions as I go through this. We have a deck that I'm going to show, and if Andy, you can, or someone can bring that up, that would be great.
Okay, your first visual is showing art on what is the technology arc. And
okay.
I'll just, click when you're ready.
Okay, so let's get to the definition of this thing. The technology arc is a method of assessing various digital-related literacies of individuals, particularly digital, ethical, and ethics and selfhood, maturity in both a physical and cyber world. And I think this is the important thing. We're not necessarily talking about how smart I am with using technology. It's also about how mature I am in the balancing of utilizing all of those. Another way, staying away from extremes. It's almost as like I'm asking you to use your computer, take notes, but you can only do it with a computer. So overall, the ARC is a linear development method of measuring that. So if we can go to the next slide, which is titled Technology Arc Highlights. And there's really two major components that we want to look at. One of them is the assessment of the technology competencies of an individual. So the important thing here is that by taking the ARC in the various forms that we can do that, one can understand where they are on that ARC in terms of levels of maturity. So it provides an inventory of technology knowledge within the institution or organization that you're part of. And this assessment provides the basis for integrating technology into various performance measurements, both academically and professionally. So what we're beginning to see is that when people struggle in what they do professionally, a lot of it has to do with their inabilities in certain areas of the technology arc to perform within the conditions that they're put in. Secondly, the technology grid defines those stages of cognitive technology development, and this grid represents the intellectual development stages of technology that can be used for evaluating this maturity. So what we're looking at here is a rubric of rows and columns, in which the columns is the level of maturity, and the rows are the various different areas that make up what I would call a mature technology individual. So we can go to the next slide. So there are, what are the outcomes of this? And I'll be able to share as we go through where we have done this and what we have seen. So from an administration or management perspective, you can learn about how to evaluate the level of technology illiteracy, whether it's among your students, your faculty, even the institution, and how to design innovative programs that can assist in student learning. And again, it's not just about the student learning based on cognitive outcomes, but producing a person that is ready to walk out in society and being able to perform, whether that's inside of a corporation or otherwise. And then for faculty members, it's to become more knowledgeable about their own literacy and how to incorporate technology in their own curricula, and understand how to create different learning environments for the people that we are managing or teaching or otherwise. Because as we all know, it's a complex issue. So now let's go to the next slide, in which you will be able to take a look at the rows and columns, so to speak, that make up the arc. So as you can see on the dimensions of the arc, the columns, are the measurements of stages of maturity in this cyberspace world. And I'll explain each one of those: functional and perceptual knowledge, and multitasking, and synthetic awareness, and competence, and multidimensional stuff. The theory behind this is very much on linear development theory. That started with Piaget and went on with people like Keegan and Perry and Kohlberg. And then there are what we call the literacy dimension variables. So what we're going to be measuring is maturity among 5 different sectors. One of them is just the maturity on how we use technology or digital itself, how we interact with people between the balance of digital and non-digital. Values really is a comparison of how we see ourselves in relation to others, and how the value systems, how people make value, can differ, particularly in a global world. Ethical has a lot to do with the way we use the data and information and the things that we get access to. And eventually the selfhood or reflection is how one sees ourselves in both a physical and a virtual world. So as you're going to see here, we can be more advanced or mature in certain dimensions than in others. So let's go to the next slide where we'll look at each one of those. But before I go on, is everybody okay with this pace? If I don't hear anything, I'll assume I'm doing okay.
Sounds great. Great pace.
Okay, thank you. So let's now, and you could see on this slide where I'm highlighting each one of the areas of the columns, which is the maturity. So the technology arc stage 1 definition, we call this functional and perceptual knowledge. And that is, I know what I have learned from authoritative sources, and this is sort of that dualistic phase. And to put it into perspective, if you look across each one of those literacy dimension variables, if I were someone who was at the stage of functional and perceptual knowledge and digital literacy, I probably use a computer the way I was taught. But as we all know, the way we were taught is not all of the ways we can do it. So many of us probably use keystrokes or sign on or use our iPhones and the technology we have likely in a very limited way. The way that we're comfortable with, the way we feel we can be productive in, but not necessarily in all of the ways that are possibilities. In interactions literacy, and this is one of the ones that we're seeing, for example, if you look at the millennials, 90% of the time they're texting you because that's the way they were brought up and taught. But there are many ways people can interact with each other. In values and ethics and reflective, all of those are based on how we were brought up. And typically those things, when we call them authoritative sources because that's where we were indoctrinated. It starts with our parents. It then goes into the communities in which we grow up, and obviously in the teachers that we have and the societies that we are used to. And of course, the challenges in cyberspace today is that the world is very flat, as Freeman said, and all of a sudden the ways we are doing things may not be the way we need to do them, particularly as technology continues to evolve and change the way we do things. So if that is clear to everybody, basically what we're saying here is an individual who would score across those areas are people who probably are productive within the confines and typically the narrow areas that they were taught how to do it. And you could go back into our early educational processes in which that type of education is very outcome-based, in which we can perform with the way we've been asked to perform. So now let's go to the next slide. And to each time we move to the right here, we are moving to a higher level of complexity or maturity in thinking. And in technology arc stage 2, which we called multitasking, is the acknowledgement that there are other ways of knowing, but they are subordinate to the authoritative sources. And let me explain this. This would mean that if in digital literacy you were in this stage 2 of multitasking, you would recognize that the way you use technology is not the way some other people use it. However, we use the word subordinate because your perspective would be that your way is better than theirs. And therefore, you would continue to utilize the ways that you were taught. Now, if you go down the rows, I was taught to text, and I'm going to continue to text, even though I recognize that other people don't text as much as I do. Values, ethics, and reflection. So what you're seeing here is a person who is in stage 2, while they are at a higher level of multiplicity, they are still very authoritative based and view others that do things differently than them in a subordinate way. In other words, they recognize it's almost condescending. But what we are seeing in stage 2 of any measurement that we would do is that we're beginning to see someone who's becoming slightly more complex. Now, if we go to stage 3, we now have reached the stage of what we call synthetic awareness, which is a commitment to the integration of those two and the recognition of the value of the blended method. In other words, the subordinate is no longer subordinate. They are indeed equivalent. And what the synthetic awareness means is a commitment by the individual to be able to do things in a multitasking way. So in the case I gave you of the digital literacy, I recognize that this is the way I use technology. I also understand that there are people who use it differently, and the synthetic awareness stage would mean that I need to commit to learning all of those. You haven't done it yet, but you are committed. Think of it this way. Stage 3 is like committing to stop smoking because it's no good for you, but you haven't done it yet. We call this stage the stage of awareness because it is so key to get someone to that stage, because before that they haven't yet necessarily internalized the value of the other. So the other now becomes equivalent to what you've learned. So in interactions and values and ethics and selfhood, all of those things, the individual has accepted the fact. It is the stage of acceptance, the importance of being able to utilize all of those. So it's almost like saying, even in digital, that maybe sometimes you can use a pen and write something down on a piece of paper, that there might be some value in that. There may be some feeling you get when you have a pen in your hand, or calling someone on the phone, or actually going in their office under certain circumstances really has value. And as we're going to see, that there are dramatic limitations if one does not get to the stage of acceptance. I'll just stop here. Is everything okay? Are there any questions, or is the pace still okay? Okay, I'm going to move ahead to the next slide, which is the stage 4, what we call competence, which is nothing more of the stabilization of the multiple methods. This would be, in the example I gave you, the case where I have in effect stopped smoking. So it becomes the stage of automatic. It becomes part of who you are. So being digitally literate in the competence level means you automatically know how to migrate between different types of technology, different ways of using technology, and even incorporating what I would call physical or manual things that are still there. And same thing with interactions. I automatically are competent enough to know at various times that this might be a better time for me to make a phone call than write a text, or go into somebody's office and talk to them. And that reflection and all of those ethical things all exist in a very complex world of choices that are based on the circumstances under each set of situation. And this is what is very key. It's almost like knowing you have a toolbox of choices and have become mature enough to know that in certain sets of situations, one or the other or both may or many may be useful to you. Now, if you were to compare that to functional and perceptual knowledge, which is stage 1, that is inconceivable. The person is more on automatic in that stage and will just utilize the methods that they were taught from authoritative sources, regardless of the changing environment that they may be in. And I hope that you can see at this point the devastating repercussions of thinking that way. And this is why we have people, as I don't know if all of you are familiar with the Peter Principle, which is a very common corporate kind of word, is we keep promoting you until you find your level of incompetence. And this is sort of associated with the fact that the environments change and people are not capable or equipped to dealing with environments that are different and that may require different types of communications. Take into, for instance, the fact that you may be dealing with someone who doesn't use their BlackBerry or their iPhone. All right, and then finally, this final stage of definition, called multidimensional, and that is the development of integrated abstract ideas on how to use multiple methods. Now, the difference between stage 4 and stage 5, which is very consistent with linear development methods, is the ultimate development of the abstract person. And that is not what is today, but what could be tomorrow. So how will I teach and interact with my students tomorrow? Which is the idea of not what I am today and what are all my choices, but what might be future choices to me, and how do I prepare for those? How in a digital literacy community can I think about some of the newer things that are coming, even like what we're doing today? How will that develop in the future? And how might that allow me to create a vision for what education might be like in the future, as opposed to reacting to what is currently there? And there are other words we use for this abstract world. Some are called autonomy, and in the very basic terms, many of us would say that this is a precursor for leadership, right? If you were to ask people the definitions of leadership, of course, that's a complex term, but some of the common words that people use are vision, autonomy, creativity. Well, what the ARC is really doing is disclosing to the person that takes it whether or not they're really in a position to be able to do that or not across a myriad of what we think are 5 crucial dimensions. All right, we can go to the next stage now. I hope the next slide. And I hope that you're following this, because now what we want to do is switch from the columns and go to the rows and fully explain what we mean by each one of these literacies and why they may be so important. So if we go to the next slide, let's look at what I called digital literacy, or sometimes is called information and computer literacy, which is nothing more than the person's cognitive skills with using the digital technologies themselves. Another way of saying this is that in today's world, someone has to have a competency level with using technology, digital technologies, in the same way they had to have that same competencies in reading and writing and math. It's now become a basic skill that everyone should have. But one of the things we see is that many people coming out of college and other areas have very limited ideas of what that literacy is. There is a literacy of competence, but then there's the component of the creativity. So can I walk into an organization, whatever that organization is, and can I think about ways in which the technology is being used that could be a vision of what it could be in the future? And for a business, that would be competitive advantage. For the military, is its ways in which our enemies may be thinking of ways on how to disrupt us. And of course, we've seen that, right? I mean, that's happening right now with the internet. So the digital literacy says, I might be able to teach people technical things, but am I teaching them the creative, and am I teaching them ways in which they understand the various new things that are going on? I was at a session just yesterday in which somebody, the chief digital officer of the museum of, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, was talking about all of the new things that are coming out. And if one is in functional and perceptual knowledge, they're going to ignore that, you see? If they're in synthetic awareness, they may be making a commitment to it and saying, boy, this is something I really have to do. But if they're in the multidimensional stage, then they're thinking immediately of ways in which that can be useful to their organizations from a strategic, visionary, leadership perspective. Does that make sense to everybody? We can go to the next slide. You see, one of the things I'm challenged with is I don't see your faces, and I don't necessarily see how you're responding to all of these things we're talking about. And this is a different type of literacy for us to develop. So the next one is interactions literacy, which I think is probably one of 2 of the most important ones. So interactions literacy relates to how how to cyberspace via the internet and expanded communications using email can influence relationships with others. Now, in a functional and perceptual area, interactions literacy means I don't care who I'm talking to, I'm going to talk to them in a certain way. And again, I use the example of texting people. Synthetic awareness would be the fact that, oh my gosh, there are many ways in which I have to do this. And the multidimensional thing, the question I would ask all of you, what do you think is going to be in a year from now in the way we communicate with people? That requires a certain amount of maturity and complexity in the way people think. They could be very, very smart, but they may not be complex. And we've seen lots of people recently in various areas that display those capabilities. They're smart, but they're not deep. So this is a very important piece of one of our dimensions because it shows up so often and early and is very identifiable to the way people progress and influence others in a leadership model. Let's go to the next slide, which is the values literacy, which is associated with a person's appreciation for an intellectual life, cultural sensitivity of others, and the sensitivity of how others view and use technology. If you're communicating with people who are in a third world country, you can't just sit there and assume that they're going to be have an understanding be able to respond and work with you and evaluate things in the way you do. It's also values literacy hits upon the cultural aspects. And one of the things we've seen in many organizations is now that the world is getting closer and cultures are communicating on a regular basis and outsourcing of performance teams throughout the world, that the interactions in values together have created all kinds of complexities. And that's because if someone's in functional and perceptual knowledge, the values of how they communicate and the ways they communicate and the things they do is embedded in the way they were taught. The synthetic awareness piece would be the viability that I have to become more of a multicultural person and be able to respect the fact that others don't think the way I do and make value of things. And then, of course, the multidimensional, and I'm skipping across these three examples for us. The multidimensional person would be, what is the world going to look like when it comes to this type of thing in the future? And how do we appreciate the multiplicities of all of these different types of value systems? And what, from a leadership perspective, are we going to do about educating and assessing it? Now, the next slide shows us the row of ethics. And of course, this is my second really big thing, and that's now we're going to be hitting upon moral development, and the ethical literacy focuses on the formation of the way people develop that. And there's a couple of pieces here, because ethical literacy in cyberspace is the way we seek information, how we evaluate it, and how we determine its ethical and moral basis, as well as its authenticity. And certainly what we're experiencing in today's complex world is we're seeing, certainly recently in the development of how the internet has been used to persuade people into certain behavior patterns that have been devastating for us to even believe that these are there. And this would show to me certainly, some of the extreme religious things that are going on, that many of these people, while they may be very intelligent, are likely in functional and perceptual knowledge in their ethics. And that is, they are sitting there and they are allowing them to be motivated by an authoritative source, okay, and not having the ability, the mature ability, not intelligence necessarily or cognitive intelligence, to be able to negotiate and say and reflect upon it and say, maybe I ought to be thinking about what other people are saying before I determine that this is the right thing to do. So in synthetic awareness, it would not be the competency of it, but it would be the determination and commitment that I have to do that. And that would then form a resistance to some of these things that people are doing. And then the multidimensional self would be someone who would think about what the ethics should be as we go forward in the future in cyberspace, and how we will be a society that will utilize this information and data. And indeed, we are in a society right now where we are overwhelmed with what we're either calling big data, all right, and utilizing it for various things that could be very scary. Another thing that falls into this is what we are now calling predictive analytics. And what that may do to the world. It has great power, but it also has great limitations to the willingness to develop people into more complex beings by predetermining at some point in their life whether or not they're going to be successful in the areas that the person who's observing that can determine it. So if I give you a test of some sort and you score in a deviant manner, I may give up on you. I would hope to think that people in multidimensional worlds understand that we can use that same stuff to help people develop. We find that people in low complexity and ethical literacies have a difficult time trying to determine how to use the information that they're getting in cybersecurity. And also may understand that some of the classical things of even reading a book in some ways, that there is value perhaps in reading it continuously instead of contiguously. And I hope that makes a sense to you. We can now go to the next slide. And we call this selfhood reflective literacy, in which the perceptions of themselves to their potentials. And that is, how do I see myself? When I'm physically in front of people, I can sort of get a sense of how they see me. But in a virtual world, they may see me very differently. And that is a whole new dynamic when one is doing the type of thing I'm doing today, or doing an online course, or even doing a video-related type of lecture in which people won't see it at a much later time. There's a difference with the way people reflect upon themselves and others when they see them physically versus when they don't see them at all. And how do we then, look at someone's voice posture or their language and what we perceive that they may or may not look like? Now we may be able to see them, and as technology gets better and better, these innovative ways in which we are doing this type of presentation today, that maybe I would be able to see you. And I would have advanced technologies to understand how you're reacting, or your body language, or all the other things that I may have previously been taught are the ways for me to reflect upon myself and my own selfhood, when in a virtual world, it's just simply more complex. Now, one of the things that we see when we have people in functional and perceptual knowledge, or even in multitasking, remember that is still in a subordinate role to the other, that people will shy away from even wanting to do it. So these are the people who may not want to teach in a virtual world, who may want to say to somebody, this course cannot be taught that way. I've been teaching it for 20 years, and I need to have people physically in my classroom. Now, we're not saying that some of that may have validity. It is the complexity of how we deal with that issue before we make that decision. Those that are in functional and perceptual knowledge, it will not be a negotiation, I will tell you that, because they will go back to the authoritative levels of how they view things. Let me again stop here if there are any questions. So what I've hoped to have accomplished at this point is simply giving you an idea of how this works. Now, if we go to the next slide, you will see what I would call a sample grid. And what you should see here immediately is, if we look at information, digital literacy, the person, this hypothetical individual, is at synthetic awareness, which means they're committed. But the same person in interactive literacy is only in multitasking, which means they're subordinate to others. And oh my gosh, in values, ethical, and reflective literacy, they are very much in a very dualistic mode of thinking in terms of the way they do things. Now, the beauty, we think, of the ARC is how one can utilize it to reflect and to measure progress. So let me give you an example. Let's say this hypothetical person here took the ARC as a freshman. And then we were to have them take the ARC again in their junior year or sophomore year. What would the growth be? What would be the growth that we were looking at? So we can then measure complexity growth across each of these areas. And of course, it can also be used to determine what areas the student needs to develop further in and what we hope to accomplish. And of course, we could use this in a number of different areas, right? We could use it professionally, we could use it strategically. So the idea behind this grid is very often is people are not consistent across each of the particular dimensions. And this gives the person the ability to also reflect on why they may be struggling in certain environments that they have been put into. It allows them to understand it on both sides and provides a very good ability to have those types of interactive conversations of development. Now, if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about a real-world result, and I'll leave the university unnamed at this point. But Lee and I were called into a situation where we were looking at the engineering profession, and I'm not an engineer. I'm more of a computer scientist or psych person. But in this particular area, there's a governing body called ABET. I honestly don't know what ABET stands for, but it's like the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And they had discovered that many of their engineers in engineering firms, while they were very good engineers, they were failing at the executive levels. Now, what does that mean? They were failing to work well in the board with their boards of directors. They weren't good managers. They didn't have good vision. They didn't understand strategy and many other things. And we were asked by the university, by the chair of the mechanical engineering department, if we could do an assessment among their students as to how they might score across the technology arc. And we had well over 100 students who took the arc across 3 levels in the university: freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. We did not look at seniors for various reasons. And we came up with 2 results, one which was staggering for us, which answered the question. What we found in the case of information, digital literacy, that the university was doing a very good job, that most of the students, by the time they had reached the junior year, actually by the sophomore year, were well equipped technically and understood the complexities of using different types of technologies in different ways. We had no problems with that. We thought we would find more in the reflective space, but we actually found that there were no really significant difference in there and values. But where we did find some very interesting things was between ethical and interactions. And I'll leave interactions for second. So if you look at the grid here, you'll find each column represents here a freshman, sophomore, and junior. And you'll notice that in ethical literacies, the students seem to become much more mature, or a little bit more mature in the sophomore year, but then took this dramatic nosedive in the junior year. And what we found there was that as they became more computer literate or digital literate, they began to become more haphazard in their use of technology. The result of that was that there was a problem among these students in that we were not able to, there was a problem between the balance of what they learned technically and what they, and how they were applying it in ethics. So that was the first real issue. The second one, which was even more important to us, is we noticed that, look what happens with interactions literacy. In each of the successive terms, we find that there is a decrease in the complexity of the way people interact. And by the time they get into their junior year, they became more dualistic. And what we found here is that once they became very technical, and this gets back to the millennial, the ways in which they wanted to communicate with people was via email and texting. So what do you think happens when you get promoted into the executive ranks and you use that same method to communicate with executives and people who report to you? So you could see here that we were able to uncover using this, all right, by showing the problem with the performance. Now, the result here was very simple. It was curricular reform, right? So what they started to implement at this university was more concentration in the later upper class people to focus more on more human, physical connections and interactions. So I notice here that we have some questions. Did this occur post internship? Yes, these things did occur post internship. This is when these individuals were promoted, eventually went through the system, and eventually became managers. I hope I'm answering the question. The question I'm getting now is, this must be the APP. We waited, formally recognized that too much technology can be a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. What we're saying is a lack of diversity within the environments that we're looking at is the bad thing. So there are times when advanced technology is crucial, but there are times when using physical and other methods are also good. I understand. That's correct. Maintaining balance is the key. And balance within the environment. Yes, you can evaluate the ARC, and in fact, Andy and I have developed a quantitative survey instrument in which, and this is what we used in the university, is that students answered a bunch of questions across a Likert scale, and then it automatically produced the grid, as we call it. However, there are other ways of doing it. We've also done this through learning journals, creating situations where students write papers. You could even do it through interviews. So there's both qualitative and quantitative availabilities. Is the survey available publicly? I'm going to let Andy answer that one because we're working on it.
Yeah, we've been working to make it available in a digital form so that people can have access. But we're also wanting to make sure that when people take the survey, they have some facilitation of interpretation of the results. And so Art and I are going to talk through some models for how we can, offer that flexibility. So when people take the survey technology ARC, they can have a way to understand what it means.
Yeah, I'll just give you an example of something I'm doing at Columbia. We have a tech management program, as you saw in my bio, in which we produce tomorrow's executive CIOs or CTOs or chief digital officers. And students come to us with 10 years of experience, and they're very, very smart in the technology. But one of the things that we've done, as I remembered the problems that we hit with this particular university, is we have oral defenses. And tomorrow, some 80 students will defend by walking into a room, seeing people's faces, because that's the kind of thing they're going to see, at least at this point, if they have to go sell a strategy to a board of directors in a company. And what we find is that most of them, in the first time they do this, are ill-equipped. So what we've done is we've used the ARC to provide us with the guidance and template of how we design the curriculum. There is a lot that has been written. Someone asked, Beth, I think you've asked whether or not this can be done for children, and there are people out there that have done this and used it in the K through 12 world. And I guess what we would like to advocate is the sooner the better, to teach students the complexity of these things and not just the knowledge to it. And indeed, we know that children have been using this stuff inappropriately at times. Think about the ethical things that we've seen children use computers for. Selby, I totally agree with your comment that knowing how to choose the right tool is as important as knowing what to do with the tool. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of people that are doing this. The question is, we teach it, but do we actually systemize it? And I think that we're at a point where we have to start thinking about how we're going to do this. So I am, in accordance, I think, 5 minutes over my time allotment. And if I guess you're right, you cannot choose the right tool if you don't understand the tool. And that's why keep in mind that synthetic awareness is still a very important thing. You need to be taught how to do this. But then the question is, how do we develop a much more complex mind to understand how to apply it? So this sort of ends my presentation, and if there are no other questions, I hope that this has been provocative. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and certainly through Andy and everyone else, please feel free to get in touch with me either via email or by phone. And I'm always thrilled when I get a chance to talk about this.
Hey, Art, this is Gerald Goodfellow again. Hey, thanks for your talk. I just wanted to make one comment. I have never seen an avatar who looks so much like the real person in my entire life. That is one heck of an avatar you got.
There's only one comment I must tell you, and that is you don't have the bow tie, so you got to work on that. And Andy, I got you a bow tie, so you got a sample there.
I'm sitting here next to one of my guys, and I had told him that same thing earlier. Everything except the bow tie. So thank you.
You're welcome.
But you were absolutely right, Art, about practicing by using tying it around near your kneecap, and I've done that actually.
Okay. Well, we'll keep working on that, but. I sincerely hope you focus on this thing, because the ways in which we're using this new digital world, and with the significant digital disruptions that are going on, people are really challenged to understand where they stand in this very complex world.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your very, very busy schedule to be here today, Art, and share the wonderful work and efforts there that you're involved with at Columbia. We appreciate it. It gives us a way to really kind of be reflective about how we can reach out with our students and engage them. We're also so very grateful for the opportunities that you've helped launch between Air University and Columbia University with the certificate program. We appreciate that very much.
Well, we're looking forward to the collaborations and would love to work with any of the people involved with this. This is part of my work, and I think everybody's work, and so looking forward to it.
Thank you. Well, we have our next speaker has been working with Dr. Jeremy Bailison, and he's Dr. Andrew Raj, and he's a research associate professor and a member of the Synthetic Reality Lab at the University of Central Florida's Institute for Simulation Training. Those are fantastic folks. We've been out there and visited with them in the past, and it's just really a treat to have someone from that simulation and training center to be here today with us. He is a specialist in human-computer interactions, and he's got a very diverse set of interests, including virtual reality, avatars, immersive analytics, which sounds very intriguing, pervasive technology, and applications to healthcare and training. He's been an active researcher in these areas for close to 12 years, and from 2004 to 2009, he has studied virtual humans for medical interview training and developed data-driven immersive actor action review tools for both trainees and instructors. And I can tell you that from the military application side, that sounds absolutely intriguing. From 2009 to 2010, he's been a postdoc at the University of Memphis and led the FieldStream framework, a mobile software platform that generates real-time inferences for behavior and stress from smartphone and wearable sensors. And that's so timely. That is absolutely timely work. And prior to joining University of Central Florida, he was an assistant professor in electrical engineering at the University of South Florida, where he's led the Powerful Interactive Experiences lab. And I don't know if many of you know about the Pi Lab, but it is internationally renowned in the work that it does. And among other things, the Pi Lab has studied pervasive avatars for behavioral change and just-in-time adaptive interventions and simulations for vocational training of people with developmental disabilities. Well, he's been already in his time in the academy. He's been extremely effective, and his research is really nationally known, internationally known. But he did get his PhD in computer engineering from the University of Florida in 2009, and an MS in computer science from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And in 2003, he received a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Northwestern University. He's a member of IEEE and a senior member of the American Computational Machinery Society, otherwise known as ACM. And with that, it is a pleasure to have you join us today. I know that you came in pretty quickly, and we're going to post your slide access in the chat window so people can see the slides as you're talking to them. But we appreciate your patience and willingness to come here on short notice. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, you're coming in really nicely.
Great.
And I've just posted the slide link for people to see your slides in the chat.
Hopefully I can figure out how to turn my eyes to look at my slides.
And you may want to hit your stand-up button too. There you go. And you can just stand there. That should work just fine.
Okay. Let's see here. So thank you, first of all, for that introduction. That was very kind. I woke up this morning and I had no idea I would be doing this. And then I got an email from Jeremy, who's a great colleague and friend, and he said that they were looking for somebody to fill in for him, and so here I am. I hope that in the process of going through some of my work, it doesn't come across as too scattered and crazy. But I think perhaps maybe my research has been scattered and crazy. Excuse me. So maybe that's just a normal part of the game. Let me see if I can. Trying to move the slides with I see the previous slides right now. I don't know.
People will have to look at your slides from a link that you gave because
sure.
we were not able to get them all up in there, and how quickly you were able to create them for us. Thank you.
No worries. So okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to download the slides. At a big picture, I've been interested in virtual reality and people's behavior in virtual reality. And behavior gets really interesting when you add in virtual people. So broadly speaking, if you look at my research, there's quite a bit of virtual people and virtual behavior, and even some interest in seeing how those things affect real behavior. My really broad questions are sort of a fill in the blank. I want to know how certain cues or characteristics of interactions between people and virtual people, how those cues can actually affect or change those interactions. What, of course, are the implications? How can we actually take what we learn about interactions with virtual humans at a science side and then apply them to real-world training applications? Then my third interest, which is perhaps maybe really my first, but it's in the process of doing other stuff. It's taken a while to get there. But it's what are the right tools to answer those two questions? How do we look at interactions between people and virtual people to better understand what works and what doesn't, and from a training and learning perspective. So I'll start out by talking about actually work I did from 2004 to 2009 for my PhD. So it's a bit old, but it really informs, I think, much of the work I've done to date. So back then, I was fortunate enough to work with Dr. Benjamin Locke at the University of Florida. He had a great system together. Him and other students, Kyle Johnson, Aaron Catranza, and other folks, we were able to build some nice systems for simulating interactions between real people, between medical professionals and virtual patients, virtual humans that are playing the role of a patient. And it was essentially a way for people to talk naturally with speech and go through the process of interviewing a patient. And there's some pictures in the slides. The part of this that I thought was most interesting was that the same technologies that we were using to sort of be the inputs into the system, the tracking systems that we were using, the microphone we were using so that people could talk to the virtual character, these were data sources. These weren't just inputs to the system, but they actually described people's behavior with the virtual characters. And so my dissertation really focused on how you can take that information, perhaps even augment it with other sensors that have nothing to do with the interaction, and learn something from them. And so I like to think of it as a three-stage process. You capture the data, the interaction signals, the way people behave. You process and filter them, and ultimately you develop some interesting interactive visualizations that allow us to learn more about how people behave in these interactions. So on my next slide, I sort of have, this is slide 6, if you're following along. There's several pictures there, and that's sort of overviews of two kinds of visualizations that we used, two things that we did to the data to get it to present it back to people. So one was to take the data and just generate visualizations. What I mean by visualization, I mean interactive graphics that says something about what people are doing when they talk to the virtual character. And then the second piece was allowing people to relive the interaction from the patient's perspective, right? So the wonderful thing about virtual reality is I can move the camera anywhere I want, as where some of us are experiencing here right now. And so in the same sense, we can take the virtual camera and move it to where the patient was, and then allow the medical student to watch what they looked like from the patient's perspective. So each of these things were very intriguing to me. On the next slide, you see a couple examples of those types of visualizations. This is slide 7. In this one, we're using head tracking data, just head tracking data, not eye tracking data, to figure out generally where people are looking when they're talking to a virtual character. Are they looking, the sort of the one on the left is an overview, right? It indicates where gaze moved over the entire, say, 8-minute interaction with a virtual character. The one on the right shows a virtual character sitting on a table, and there's a target that is sort of on top of her face, right? And that target represents where the person was looking at the particular moment in time at the bottom, listed just below the picture, time equals 9 minutes, 27 seconds. And so these were at least two ways to look at the data, right? Is to provide the overview and the in-the-moment perspective. On the next slide, I talk about a different aspect of the data. So earlier, in the previous slide, I was really focusing on a nonverbal behavior, gaze behavior. But there's also verbal behavior. And because we had people wearing microphones and they were talking directly to the virtual character, we were using speech recognition to pull out somewhat decent transcripts of what everyone was saying. And that gave us quite a bit of power, because it meant that we could go back and take those transcripts, like what you see on the right side of slide 8, and essentially read through what happened to the limits of the accuracy at the time. I mean, I wonder if we did this again today, how much better these transcripts would be. But what you're seeing here is basically a transcript of a medical student talking to a patient who came in who's afraid she has breast cancer. And there are some part of the interaction, the key part of the interaction, is sort of being able to express empathy. So there's a point in the interaction where the patient says, "Oh, my mother lost her life to breast cancer 2 years ago," and you know what you want to see from the doctor is acknowledgement of this sort of scary event, because it's clearly related to why the patient is there, and trying to at least reassure them that there's quite a bit more to do before we know what the problem is, right? And so if you follow the transcript, just reading it from top to bottom, you'll see that it actually takes a little bit of time between when the student says, when the patient says, "I lost my mother to breast cancer," which is about 3 minutes and 10 seconds, to when the student finally comes back and says, "I'm sorry to hear that," which is highlighted at 3 minutes 45 seconds. So that right there is an interesting piece of data that you could pull out potentially from these kinds of transcripts. On top of that, we were able to generate what we call topic flows from these transcripts. What that means is, in these medical interactions, there are certain stages in the interaction. You start by greeting the patient. Then you have what's called the chief complaint, where the patient explains what's wrong. Then history of present illness, how they were, what is going on right now, and so on. And in fact, the blurb from the transcript on the right-hand side comes right from this highlighted area here in the middle on the black graph called topic flow, and that falls under the category family history.
I'm talking, so everybody in the virtual, like if I'm in another room, I can hear you talking to me. When you're not wanting to talk, you just click.
So what we have here is we have the topic flow showing when different topics were discussed. We not only can see when people brought things up, perhaps if it was too soon or too late, if they brought them up again, which could be a sign that the student wasn't paying enough attention the first time around, or perhaps wants to be really, really sure that they got it right. And then the other thing that the student can do is actually click on this back on the transcript and watch a video of their behavior at that particular moment in time. So the topic flow gives us a kind of a full picture of the verbal behavior of the interaction. Now on the next slide, we basically took the topic flow and made one for every participant in our study and put them side by side, essentially, or stacked them top to bottom. So the thinking here was it would be very interesting to be able to understand if there are patterns with respect to different groups. Do residents and expert clinicians do differently than students? How do they interact fundamentally differently? So that's a really nice research tool. It's a nice educational piece of information if you're an instructor. And so that was the goal with this one, with this next visualization. And we had other ways of sort of repositioning and sorting and highlighting parts of the data that could be of interest. So for example, what's happening in this is slide 10. We've resorted the data by where the y-axis is the sort of the list of topics that you saw a couple slides ago. And you'll notice that there's a certain area that I've selected in the upper right-hand corner, and then it actually tells me which participants were speaking at that time. And that's useful because they were talking about the history of present illness at the very end of the interview, and perhaps by that point that shouldn't have been something they discussed anymore. That should have been information that the student learned at the beginning. So you can see how taking all this data from these virtual interactions, these interactions with virtual people, processing them in different ways, and then finding and testing creative ways to present them back to people can really give interesting insights, both into behavior in VR and, ideally, behavior outside of VR. So moving on to the next slide, and I'm probably going to speed up just a little bit because I want to make sure I get to some of the newer work that I'm doing now. On the next slide is when we really started to look at what the world looks like through the patient's eyes. We were trying to find a way for the medical student to actually practice sort of being the patient to the extent that's possible. And so we built a system where the medical student would talk to the virtual character, have a normal medical interview, we would record everything, and then they would put on a head-mounted display and sit on a table like the virtual character sat on. And I'll zoom forward to say probably the best picture of that is on slide 16. And so what you have here is that the medical student can now watch themselves performing the interview with the patient. There's video of themselves composited into the virtual world, and they're wearing a head-mounted display, so as they turn their head and look down, for example, they'll see the patient's legs, which you can see actually in the previous slide, on slide 15. And so this was a way for medical students to re-experience the whole thing from the patient's perspective. And there were to us, this was a very interesting system, not just because people were being encouraged to see through the eyes of another person, but in particular, this situation involved a medical exam, a breast exam. And there was even a component where we recorded a breast exam that was done on a simulator and then reprojected it into the scene. And so essentially we had a way for the medical student to sort of, at least visually, experience the breast exam virtually. They didn't feel anything, but they saw what was happening to them. They saw the hands of essentially themselves performing an exam on the patient, whose body they were inhabiting at the time. And what I always found fascinating is when the male doctors did this. This must have been a fairly unfamiliar experience for them. They're unlikely to ever experience it. So if you're a male doctor who's about to see a patient who's worried about cancer, breast cancer, and you're going to do this physical exam, I think this is a powerful piece of information to have, a powerful experience perhaps to have. Might inform how you move forward. So this sort of summarizes up until here what was in my dissertation and sort of how I was thinking about how data equals knowledge. And perhaps going back to, I think early on, there was in the video there was this great pyramid. At the bottom was data, massive amounts of data, and at the very top, I believe, was wisdom, perhaps, or insight, something along those lines. And I really think that's exactly the way I see the training world, and of course beyond, as the video implies, with the Internet of Things and so on. I see lots of potential to use the data that we are already collecting using interesting simulations to really improve training. So, switching gears completely, I'm not exactly sure how much time I have left, but I would just keep talking until somebody stops me. Switching gears completely. Right now, I'm at the University of Central Florida. I work with Professor Greg Welch most closely. He is a PI on a project called Human Surrogate Interaction. It's funded by the Navy, ONR, Office of Naval Research, by Dr. Peter Squire, Code 30. And we're basically broadly looking at what people do with virtual characters in a lot of unique or interesting situations, which depending on the outcomes of these experiments, and you can see sort of all of them on slide 19, depending on the outcomes of these experiments, could actually very much change how we build virtual human systems moving forward for training and otherwise. So the first one I'll talk about is the lobby study. The lobby study was very interested in understanding if two things matter: physicality and gesturing. What I mean by physicality is the extent to which you occupy a space in the real world, right? Do you have a body that can be interacted with, touched, and so on? And gesturing, which is what you would understand normally as gesturing, moving your hands, right, while you talk. We essentially took a robot. So if you go on to the next slide, slide 21, we took a robot and we put this robot in the lobby of our building. And this robot had physicality, right? It had a physical body that people could come up to and touch, and technically could shake its hand. It also had a head on it that with a projector inside, so it allowed us to project whatever face we want on there. And in this case, we sort of chose a generic sort of young, maybe college or slightly or graduate student sort of look. So we put this robot in there, and then we also had a different version where instead of putting the robot in the lobby of the building, we put the robot in another room. We put some cameras in that room facing the robot, and we had people, and we dragged TV screens out to the lobby so that people would interact with a flat version of the robot, right? And so this was a way to test this physicality concept, which do people behave differently when the robot actually takes up space, physical space in the environment, than if it's just flat on a screen, which is what we're often used to with virtual characters. And so this is kind of an important question. Perhaps physicality matters quite a bit. And we ran a 2x2 study also looking at gesturing behavior. What happens when the virtual character gestures, or I should say when the robot gestures. And I do want to point out, actually, all of this O&R work, which was funded, all of this O&R research was done in collaboration with Jeremy. He's been a big help, particularly on the lobby study. We had quite a bit of discussion on how to design this the right way. So in any case, I'll step forward a little bit. I should also say that there was a human in the background actually controlling the robot. And the whole purpose of this was sort of to remove the artificial intelligence as a variable from the problem. So are we looking at we wanted to make sure that if the virtual character responded in a strange way, or the robot responded in a strange way, that wouldn't sort of detract from the overall goals of the study. And so we removed it by essentially, one, using the video stream, and two, having a real person control the robot. And if you go down to slide 23, you can sort of see the quick overview of how people interacted with the virtual character, what happened. Essentially, the character was in the lobby of our building for 2 hours a day. We did this for 40 days. 10, each condition had 10 days assigned to it. So essentially, we had about 80 hours total of people walking up and saying hello to our robot also saying hello, and going back and forth. Some of the conversations were longer than others. Some people walked past and completely ignored the virtual character. Some people just waved. We had one day where it happened to be take your son and daughter to work day. And so we had, 40 kids in the lobby of the buildings coming through. And that was, we consider that an outlier day. It was very different than the usual population in our building. But it was very interesting just to even see that and how much interaction the kids had with the robot. So that sort of gives you a sense of what people did with the robot when they walked into the lobby. And then the next few slides summarize essentially what we found, and I won't, sort of belabor the numbers and so on, but at a high level, we were looking at, well, how proactive were people with the robot versus with the TV screen? Meaning, how did the physicality affect people's proactivity, the extent to which they reach out and sort of engage with the robot and start a conversation with the robot? And so, indeed, the robot appeared to sort of elicit more proactivity in individuals. The other interesting result that we found was that people were more reactive to the robot when it was gesturing. What I mean by reactive is if the robot said hello, people were more likely to walk up to the robot and respond and continue the conversation with them if the robot was also doing gestural motions with their hands. And so you might view that as a kind of a realism question, or perhaps could just be that just the motion of the hands gets more attention, and therefore people are more likely to engage purely based on this, what's this, reaction. So I will skip over the rest of these, mostly just because we have 4 or 5 other projects which I'd love to at least mention. But you have the slides, and I'm happy to answer any questions later by email or what have you about them. Now, the next study we did, the next study I'll talk about is what we call the wobbly table experiment. This was published this year at IEEE Virtual Reality 2016. And it's all about what happens when people interact with each other through shared physical virtual objects. So now we're on slide 28, right? And if you see in slide 28, there are several sort of pictures of situations where people are engaged or interacting sort of with the same physical object, and each one's actions in turn affect the other. These are normal things that we see all the time. And so we were curious about how the effects of this ability to interact with a shared physical virtual object would affect the overall sense of what we call social presence, or the extent to which people were willing to buy into the interaction with the virtual human and treat it more seriously. So what we had on the next slide, slide 29, we have a situation. We designed a room where essentially there was a table, and the table, a real wooden table, and it actually in the middle of the table we had a screen, a projection screen coming down, sort of cutting off in the middle of the table there, and a virtual character displayed on that screen. But the interesting thing was that we had the table extend into the virtual world, so that it essentially appeared like they were sharing the same table. So this was a key aspect of the interactions. We wanted it to appear like they were sitting together, right? Almost like you're sitting together at a dining room table, right? Or at a restaurant. And in there, the participant would walk in and they would play a game of 20 questions, trying to guess what object the other is thinking of. And we designed it in such a way where it was very constrained. And somebody in the background was essentially clicking buttons, controlling what the virtual character was saying. Things like, is it a shoe? Is it red? Is it a color? Is it, and so on, the kinds of questions you might ask in the game of 20 questions. But the interesting thing that we varied in this experiment, if you go to slide 30, is we actually allowed the table to wobble. This was our sort of way of creating this physical virtual connection through a third object, right? Through a shared object. And so if the participant leaned on the table, it would actually rise on the virtual side because we were using a sensor to measure the angle of the table from the wall, from the screen. Vice versa, if the virtual character leaned on the table on the virtual side, it would rise on the patient, on the participant side. And so they were both able to sort of communicate indirectly, almost, I don't want to say subconsciously, that's not the right term, but essentially through the table without really, in a way that probably doesn't materially affect the task that they were doing, right? Which is playing this game of 20 questions. So I essentially described all of that. What's on the next slide already? What we did find is that people in the wobbly group, people who interacted with a virtual character, and the table was wobbly, essentially exhibited higher social presence and more presence or sense of being in the same environment with her, and also overall had a more positive perception of virtual human. This is based on some standard survey measures that have been used in our study and other studies in the VR world on social presence and so on. The study led to many follow-up questions, which slide 32 starts to touch on. Questions like, well, was it the fact that the virtual human was aware that the table showed awareness of the moving table? Was it that there was a haptic sensation, a touch, a haptic sensation communicated to the table, and so on? What are the pieces that really matter to create this increased effect? And so you could imagine, in theory, we could develop scenarios where having this kind of shared physical virtual object could actually be a strength, a way to strengthen an interaction between a real and virtual character, if we can truly understand which are the pieces that mattered here. And we're planning follow-up studies. There's one sort of shown at the bottom of slide 32. I won't get into that. So let's see, where am I? Okay, well, I'll just keep talking until literally I have no time in front of me. So
5 minutes, and then we'll introduce our last one since our time is getting short, but fascinating.
Sure. No worries. Plenty to fill 5 minutes with. I'll mark the clock. I'll look at the clock as I go. But so moving on to the next experiment on slide 33, this one turned out to be much more inconclusive, and we're really revisiting this one completely. But it's also a very important question, which is, in an interaction between a real person and a virtual person, what is the importance of the things that are happening around in the environment, around the interaction, so both in the virtual side of the environment and the real side of the environment, and how much awareness should the virtual character exhibit towards these things? If the virtual character, if somebody walks in a door right behind you as you're talking to the virtual character, and the virtual character completely ignores it and keeps talking to you as if nothing's happening, that's pretty unrealistic. And so the question at a high level is, does that matter? And how does that matter eventually, we'd like to know if that matters from a training effectiveness perspective. But at this point, we just want to see if it changes the relationship in the sense of social presence with the virtual character. So if you go to slide 34, there are some pictures showing various sort of environmental effects that we were experimenting with. In particular, in our last version of the experiment, we've had many versions trying to understand this without anything definitive. We actually had a virtual paper on the other side of the table next to the virtual human that would flutter if a fan, a real fan in the real side of the environment, rotated towards it. This is a rotating fan, and as it rotated away, the papers would stop fluttering. And we also experimented with making the virtual character show awareness that it was fluttering by essentially putting her hand on top of the paper. That's what the next slide shows. And the truth is, we did not seem to find anything definitive at all to work with here. And this is still puzzling us, because this is actually the second variation on this experiment that we've run. I mean, in our minds, this is very much related to what we did with the table, actually, in a sense, but we're separating what's happening in the separating these sort of interesting connected events, separating it almost completely from what the virtual character and participant are doing, and yet, and that might just be the trick right there, is because these events have absolutely nothing to do with this interaction between the real and the virtual. Perhaps that is why we see no effect here. But we're still working on that and working towards the next design to really have a better understanding. So I will skip the next one, social presence priming. I would like to jump to slide 44 very quickly and just highlight that going all the way back full circle to where I started, all of these experiments are not so different than the ones I used to do as a graduate student with the virtual patients, and including the fact that they involve sensors, lots of wonderful sensors. And the sensing technology has come so far now where we can gather a variety of data on the individual in a very unobtrusive way. And so we're very interested now in figuring out, one, how to take all the data from all these many different sensors, how to build sort of like a framework around it, a software framework to allow us to combine the data, look at it, process it, and learn something from it. And so there's some sort of deep sort of tech work going on behind the scenes, trying to build a software framework to build an entire logger, visualizer, and so on for this kind of data. And ultimately, the goal is to quantify human behavior in new ways by using all of this data and then being able to apply it back to all these great experiments that we've been running. And the last thing I'll highlight is we now have a wonderful new space which sort of goes along with this software framework. On slide 50, we have something called the HUSIS, or the Human Surrogate Interaction Space, which was funded by ONR as well through a DURP grant. And this is essentially, and it's actually very much inspired by Jeremy's lab, Jeremy Bailenson lab. And the idea here is to have a much more professional setting to do human subject experiments with virtual characters. And I won't go into the details. You can look at some of the pictures and slide to show you what's possible in there. We have four-wall projection, of course. We have sensors in the ceiling. We have a control room on the side. We have participant booths where participants can go and fill out surveys, and they can even and we can even pipeline so that we can have a participant in the booth, two participants, one in each booth, plus a participant inside the actual HUSIS, the room, and they can experience all of these things. And we can have this kind of pipelining effect, so we can maximize the number of participants. That's our great lesson from Jeremy, who has an excellent lab for this. And then on the very last slide, slide 56, is something called the THUSIS. It's the Transportable Human Surrogate Interaction Space, which is a new DURP we just got funding for, which is essentially trying to figure out how to put all this in a box and take everywhere we go. So people can run experiments wherever they like. Imagine taking this to the mall instead of doing it in our office building like we did before, or taking it over to, say, Camp Pendleton, or whoever has a need. And that's it. That's sort of the summary of everything we're doing. Hopefully I didn't go too far over.
Oh, what we want to do is have another invite for you to come back, because there is just a huge amount of relevance in what you're doing, as I see with the Office of Naval Research and the Department of Defense generally across these immersive spaces to create really high believable opportunities for training education. And we love the data collection and richness of the insights on what we can learn about the interactions and the impact. And we were out at Jeremy Bailison's lab not too long ago and actually had the opportunity to interact in that kind of space that you're working on there at University of Central Florida. It is totally amazing how you believe it. He had us walking across wooden planks, spanning skyscrapers.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's scary.
It is.
It really scares you.
It
Yeah.
is amazing, and we are so thrilled to be introduced to your research work. I mean, the significance of it is just spectacular. We can't even begin to thank you for the time you've been willing to share with us. You whet our appetites.
Great. Well, maybe that was the whole point.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'll just say,
you made a lot of new friends here today.
Good. I'm glad. I'll just, I don't want to make it sound like this is all me, obviously, and to highlight again, Greg Welch, who secured the funding for this ONR grant, and none of this work would be possible without him. And we also have a great faculty member, Charlie Hughes, who's involved with the project. And of course, Jeremy's involved. And so it's a really nice team.
Well, wonderful. It's such an honor to be able to have you here today and represent the work and the team. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, our next keynote speaker is Dr. Nancy Sherman, and she's been so patient to come out here. This is her first experience with this, and it speaks volumes to her willingness to explore new situations and environments. And Nancy, we are going to really have an enjoyable time talking about the memories from this today with you. But I want to just share a little bit about Nancy, Dr. Nancy Sherman. She received her doctoral degree from Harvard and a master's in literature from the University of Edinburgh. She really fascinating. From 1997 to 1999, she served as the first distinguished chair in ethics at the U.S. Naval Academy, and we are just so excited to have someone that has an actual background and experience with our service academies to be here today. She's designed brigade-wide required military ethics course, as well as laying the groundwork for our new Stockdale Ethics Center. And she's taught at Yale, which is my alma mater, so it's great to have a Yaley here, John Hopkins, and the University of Maryland, and is trained in psychoanalysis at the Washington Psychoanalytic Institute. Since 1995, she has consulted for the U.S. Armed Forces on issues of ethics. So she brings this tremendous experience for all of us in her insights. She's looked at resilience and post-traumatic stress, and she's lectured at the Uniformed Services University and the Walter Reed Army Hospital and the National Defense Universities. And Nancy, you're going to find that many of our attendees here today have been at these defense universities, so that you're going to have kindred spirits with you today. And she's been very involved with military academies across DOD and bases and veteran groups. So you can tell she's no stranger to us in Department of Defense. She's actually, now wait till you hear this, Nancy's actually visited Guantanamo Bay Detention Center as part of an independent observer team assessing the medical and mental health care of detainees. And she served on the board of directors from the Carnegie Council on Ethics and International Affairs. I know some of you know about that council and how prestigious it is to be a part of that. She has received fellowships for her work from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, which I'm very fond of myself, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the American Council for Learned Societies, and the Mellon Foundation, and the Yale Whitney Humanities Center, which is an awesome place, the American Philosophical Society, and the Newcomb Fellowship of the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. Wow, very impressive. She's also a New York Times notable author, and at Harvard, she was awarded the George Plimpton Adam Prize for the most distinguished dissertation in the history of philosophy. So I can go on, and I'm gonna talk at the end, Nancy, and reference your new book, which is a pretty extraordinary publication that all of you are certainly welcome to check out and view. But it's called After War, and she explores the healing of the moral wounds of our soldiers. And I can tell you, I don't want to spoil it for you, but it is a fascinating analysis and an understanding, really in-depth understanding of some of the moral wounds that our soldiers in arms have faced and are dealing with. Just so you know, right now she's a university professor at Georgetown and a professor of philosophy, and she has an affiliate appointment with the Georgetown's Law Center on National Security, and also is a faculty affiliate at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics. So she's very interdisciplinary. And Nancy, we love that about you. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. You're coming in really nicely.
Okay. So I did practice standing up and sitting down, but I think I'm going to sit down because I'm afraid I'll lose the slides if I do anything more sophisticated.
Oh, so, that's perfect.
Okay. Thanks very much. And thank you for this opportunity to reach so many this way. I am an old school person, but live in a family with a guy that's been in computing since probably its inception almost, and is a big data guy, and a son who's a product manager at LinkedIn. So I'm the outlier here. All right. What I really, and I just want to thank you, Andy, and thank Brad Aldrich and Tony Scribner for their help today. I came to all this because of an ethics scandal at the Naval Academy in the mid-90s, cheating. And so I've been thinking about character, integrity, and also how that gets disrupted by war, and what the sort of shock to the system is as a result of war. So if we could have the next slide. I'm thinking I can do this myself, but can I move to the next slide? Is that easy? Nope, there's one in between. Sorry, that's not what I have up. I have a picture of the book. No? Oh, oops. Okay, that's, well, I'm sorry, we're missing some of the slides, so let's see. All right, I don't see the proper slide I'm looking for. Do you have one? Excuse me, the deck isn't showing up properly. Do you have, that's slide 10 on my view. No, go backwards. Keep going backwards, please. No, back. Oh, somehow these are not showing up properly. All right, I'll move as we have it here. So I'll just start talking and then click in as I need to. So I've come to this because I'm really interested in breaking down MIL-SIV walls and trying to get folks that are on the civilian side, which is already a kind of military term and the opposite of being in the military, engaged in conversations with service members in the classroom and often in a real classroom. Georgetown's very involved with returning soldiers, and by that all services and the Guard and the Reserves, and they often feel isolated. So I teach war ethics, and they somehow seem to find my classrooms. So these are just some issues that I want to go through. This is a kind of personal subject for me in a set of slides I guess you're not seeing. My dad was a medic, and so he carried his dog tags for, he died at 89 and had him since since he was, sorry, we're playing with the slides. They're somehow not showing up unless you see, whoop, that's not mine. But can we just have a second here to see? Okay, but go back, please. That's slide 2. Okay. So I wrote After War really as I was thinking about my dad. The next slide should be dog tags. Are you seeing it, please? No. Is there any way that I can control the deck? That's not mine. Okay, that's slide 3. So my dad, thank you. My dad carried these in his pocket for about 65 years. I didn't know he had them, and he never told me. So he had a kind of don't ask, don't tell policy. And I think that pact of silence is just deadening, and I didn't want to see that again, and I think that's the unconscious motive behind my work. So let me just tell you what I want to do in about 45 minutes, and I really appreciate your patience. It's been a lot of information and a lot of, I hope, wisdom in a short period of time, but a long afternoon. I want to talk about my current work on moral injury and what it's like from a philosophical point of view, what moral healing looks like, secondly. Thirdly, lead by immersed stories of those I've come to know over 5-6 years. And finally, offer some recommendations. So I am a moral philosopher, but the traditional focus of moral philosophy is, as many of you know, just war theory. Is the cause of war just? Is the conduct of war just? Is the afterwar, the postbellum, just? And what are the justifications for fighting? For going, being, and returning after some kind of reconciliation or not. We're all worried about lack of victory these days. Now, my concern is with moral justification, but how soldiers take it in, how airmen take it in personally, how they hold themselves accountable, and in particular, what the emotions feel like of holding yourself accountable. What does it feel like to feel raging moral disappointment, resentment, a sense of betrayal, a sense of indignation, and loss that quickly morphs into blame or a sense of guilt or finger pointing? So the idea is that these are really disabling emotions. The suicide epidemic speaks to it. I think a lot of the suicides, if you believe 22 a day for veterans, that's probably high, but and inaccurate. I think the suicide epidemics are not just about PTSD traditionally understood as a fear response, but a sense of moral collapse, a lack of moral identity, if you like. And some of the times you don't really understand it because the issues get cloaked by a sense of stoic armor that you can tough it out and truck on. But that's a perishable defense. And any good commander knows that that toughness is perishable and that you need other protective factors when you lose it. So let's think a little bit about moral injury. Next slide, please. It should be a Greek vase. Nope, not in order. Nope. It's my slide 4. Nope. Oh, I'm sorry. All the way at the top, slide 4. I don't know why these aren't showing up. Next one should be. All right, I'll just move on. No. Well, the idea of moral injury. Pardon, audience. Excuse the shuffling here. Just keep going back for a wee bit. Or perhaps we're getting there. About 4 back. Okay. Well, I'll just talk through this for a minute. The idea is that what you're seeing sliding through here are masks that I'll talk about in a minute that are produced at Walter Reed as part of the healing of moral injury. But the idea is very old, and it goes back to Greek tragedy. And if you sort of look at some old vases, they're Ajax, an old Greek hero, is being dissed, essentially, shamed on the battlefield by not being given Achilles' armor. And the vases that I was trying to represent here give you a sense that he's lost and being he fails to. This is distracting. Let's see if we could just go back to the masks, and we'll just stay put for a while. Okay, we'll just stay there for a little while. So the masks are representations of moral injuries, and the idea is that you're essentially caught without your guard, and you're trying to express this horrible sense of guilt. So let me just talk about moral injury for a bit without my focusing on these masks. The idea of moral injury that's old is that you, in a sense, have lost a sense of goodness or a sense of moral bearing, and you can feel this from the point of view of yourself as an agent. You can feel it from the point of view of a victim. You can feel it from the point of view of a bystander. One of the pictures that I'm trying to show is of a commander that was dragged through the streets of Mogadishu. The person that took that picture is a man named Paul Watson, who was a bystander, but a totally engaged bystander, a photojournalist. And that picture, which if we could somehow bring it up, of Mogadishu in 1993, became the reason that Clinton pulled out troops at that time. And what Watson heard all of this time was essentially, if you do this, I will own you forever. That was the words of the commander that he had shot. And shot in the sense of captured by a photograph. No, we're not there. So that guilt hounded him as a bystander, as a photojournalist immersed in war. Now the emotions, pardon me, I'm sorry, I'm just going to now talk to the deck holder here. Is there another way for me to get into my own slides? I'm not. I guess not. Okay.
If you want, you can control the arrows. It looks like when they were uploaded, they weren't uploaded in the right sequence. They were alphabetized based on how they were uploaded. So, but you can
how can I do
yourself.
that? How can I do that?
Just by moving the left and right arrow keys on the podium, you can go to the slide that you need to show.
Oh, I'm not in the.
With your mouse.
Yeah, I don't think I can get in the podium at the same time as I can get into. Let's see. I don't think I may lose you if I try to get into the podium.
Up above. Right.
Pardon me?
Andy, she's looking at the slides above her head. So if she goes to the podium, she'll lose the view of the slide, see? Joyce has a recommendation. If you have the original deck, Andy, you can look at it and then number the slides inside the slide, the alphabetized names, and then just reset the script and they'll be in order. That's another solution. If you want to
we don't have the actual original set, so
for sure.
Okay, I'm going to talk without them because I'm having difficulty seeing the flipping, and I'll mention them occasionally. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So one of the emotions that we're really interested in is a sense of guilt and shame. And for me, the most immersed way to understand this is by just going into the cases that I came to learn about. Now, there's a man named Major Jeff Hall, who is a Army helicopter pilot, whom we may be able to bring up. Perhaps someone can help me do that. And he is someone who went to war totally convinced that that war would, that engage and destroy would be the modus operandi. And what he faced essentially was what most of you face, is that coin operations and the like. And one incident totally undid him, and that was he was put in charge of handling a collateral incident and making reparations to a family. He was given $750, which he found to be a piddling compensation allowance. And when the family finally came to him, eager for, can we get the slide up of Major Jeff Hall? Is that possible? When he came to no. Make reparations, they all really wanted was a sense of the bodies. They wanted to have a proper Christian burial for the bodies. And so when he got them after about 3 or 4 months of scorched heat, they were disfigured. And I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to talk to the tech folks right now. Not working for me on this end. All right, let's just go back a few to the picture you had initially of his family holding 4 children. When he came to finally get the bodies to them, they were essentially disfigured, and they accepted them, but what they wanted were death certificates. And the Iraqi health ministry at the time, there he is, there's Jeff, said, sorry, they're combatants, enemy combatants. This was the final straw. Jeff ended up back at Fort Riley after 2 years or so, and essentially couldn't put on his combat boots till a benign and benevolent officer sent him to Walter Reed. And what you're seeing is a mask that Jeff made that was reproduced with other masks that were being flipped through in the deck from the healing brigade at Walter Reed, one of the resilience brigades. And this was amazing because, in a sense, he couldn't show his shame and his sense of just a broken identity except through the mask. This is his family. His wife Sherry on the left went with him. So it was really remarkable. And if we could sort of flip through some of the other masks, now we can show the masks if we can do that. You get a sense, or you've been looking at some of the traumas of war as they're disclosed through art therapy. And this is not talking therapy. This is physical, in the room, plaster. Now you got to remember that in old times, World War I, World War II, people wore masks in order to hide facial disfigurement. So these have a history in war trauma and war healing. In this case, they're not necessarily physical disfigurement, but moral disfigurement, and a sense of these reactions of shame, guilt, disappointment, and a sense of moral failure that has really left people behind. So all this convinces me that if we think of if we think of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, we drop the D, think of it as post-traumatic stress, as many want to do. If you think of it just as a fear-conditioned response, which is how people previously thought about it, and really that's the 1980s definition in the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual that psychiatrists use for insurance. It's primarily about response to life threat, response to fear of life threat. And this is not what these people are experiencing. What these people are experiencing is grief that looks for blame, and grief that shows up in shame, and anger that comes out in feelings directed to self, feelings directed to others, to commanders whom they feel exploited them, to public that they feel exploited them. In the book After War, I talk about resentment, one of the emotions of moral injury. Resentment towards civilians who say, thank you for your service, without really understanding that perfunctory exchange doesn't do much for many. It may get you over the chill that followed the Vietnam hangover, where you couldn't separate the war from the warrior, but it doesn't really break the ice. And so it doesn't let people come out of their bunkers. So if anything, it still keeps people, civilians and military, in bunkers without a sense it can really, really engage. So Jeff worked through some of these, and through a feeling that relates to some of the discussion earlier of empathy, through a sense of, but in this case it was self-empathy. It wasn't a doctor being trying to feel what breast cancer feels like for a woman. This is feeling yourself when you've lost connectivity to the hurt because you're so medicated. If we can get back to that picture of the person with a cocktail of drugs and self-medicating, you flip through the slides, you see a lot of self-medication. We have any, is there a way of getting, there's right after that, at least in my pack, slide, yeah, here's a service member, again, Walter Reed, Melissa Walker, art therapist working with these soldiers at the Resilience Brigade, Wounded Warrior or Resilience Brigade, and this was captured by National Geographic. Often these meds keep you at some distance from yourself rather than feeling connected. So I want to talk a little bit about what self-empathy might be like, and I'd like to now do it through another story of one of my students named Tom Febront. And now we can go to the map, if we can, of Tal Afar, Iraq. These masks are remarkable. Here we are. So Tom is in this area near Mosul. He's cavalry, Army cavalry, eyes and ears of the Army. Really good at it. He said that his commanders had a sense of his they had trust and confidence in his competence. He's so good and spent so much time outside the wire that he needed some R&R. And when he was in Qatar, he learned that his best buddy, Lieutenant Edens, had gotten shot with 5 others in a raid. They were trying to deal with folks that had come through the border near Mosul, near Syria, and he was shot. And he learned this poolside in his response, and he sort of talked through this with me in office hours. I'm not a clinician, I should say, caveat, not a clinician, do not see patients, have psychoanalytic training, but do not practice. And he sort of said, it was devastating. And what was devastating was that he thought he could have controlled it. It would have been different if he were there. He would have known better. So there was a could have and a should have. And it took 3 years for him to talk and 3 years to feel any self-empathy. And the self-empathy he came to was simply remarkable in my view. He put it this way, that he was home on a leave thinking about whether to re-up. And as he was thinking about it, he realized that he was now away from the battlefield for about 3 weeks. And he didn't know what was happening. He's put it, there were gaps and breaches in my intelligence. And he said, if I'm away this long and I don't know what's happening, what's it going to be like when I get back to Iraq? He said, I'm not going to be able to know it all and really have a picture of the intelligence scene. And he said, at that point, I realized that I wasn't the one-stop intel analyst for the whole Army. Maybe my role was very small. That, to me, was an epiphany. And for him, you could just see the moral burden drip off his shoulders. And I say that because it didn't come easily. If you're maybe thinking of it clinically, it sounds like, well, of course, otherwise you'd be grandiose. But the sense of strict liability that service members carry just can't be overestimated. They are always taught absolutes, never leave a fallen comrade behind, cover each other's back, be all you can be if you're in the Army. Always these absolutes. They hardly understand that these are imperfect duties, not perfect duties. You can't fully fulfill them. And if you tried, you'd only be, you'd be aiming for godlike perfection. But in the mind of an 18-year-old, not fully formed brain, temporal lobes that are just not fully, they're still adolescent. a sense of enormous power, a sense of enormous responsibility, a sense of holding themselves strictly liable, to use a legal term from torts. They put it all on their shoulders, and often command, I have to say, from high up, puts it on their shoulders, and some would argue morally exploits those further down. And they take it personally. And in his case, it took him a long time to process that this was bad moral luck as opposed to incompetence. And he later called me and he put it in terms of this paradigm. I've been wondering, Professor Sherman, if I'm like the cop that was off duty and if he had been there would have been able to intervene, or I'm like the homeowner who was negligent and failed to put a fence around the pool and a neighborhood kid fell in. And he said, I think I'm more like the cop that was off duty. And I felt that hit it on the head. He had, what I would say, processed a sense of self-empathy. And I want to say this isn't forgiveness because he did nothing wrong. There was no guilt really objective guilt to overcome, but it was a subjective guilt and a sense, you might call it survivor guilt, I call it luck guilt. He had the bad luck of not being there at the right time. And that's what many carry. It's not the only kind of sense of responsibility, but that's an overwhelming sense of responsibility. And I think we have to understand it. And the healing that comes with carrying that sense of guilt is, I think, a kind of self-empathy. You don't go numb, you feel the hurt, you connect with the hurt again, but you feel it more faintly. It's still in muscle memory, but not as strong a scar as it was before. So that's a sense of self-empathy. And I want to just move to the next two slides, which are another picture of Talifar and oops, we lost connectivity, I think. And a picture of troops leaving Talifar. If you can get there. No, I'm sorry. Forgive me, viewers. Can we get to folks leaving Mosul? If not, we're going to move on. Yeah. Okay. Next one. Next slide. Okay. Now, this is Mosul in. I can't quite see it. I think it's 2001. But what you see is the lack of closure for Tom. He sort of settled some of his debts, and then it reopened a sense of futility as the war has continued and left so much lack of closure for so many of the troops, and that's part of the moral injury. All right, so self-empathy is one of the emotions I study in my work afterward to think about how we get through some of the injuries of war. I should say moral injury isn't just a phenomenon of war. Rape victims suffer moral injury. Those who are victims of attack and assault suffer moral injury. Those who are victims of gay outings and the like suffer moral injury. It's rampant, but combat trauma is one particular version of it. And I want to move on a little bit to talk about hope as another version of healing, another emotion of moral healing. And here, if we could somehow find the pictures that we were floating through before of Dan Brzezinski, I can illustrate with that picture. Here we go. So West Point grad goes to Kandahar, 2009. He tries to retrieve body parts of an observer, and he himself gets blown up. I met him at Walter Reed when he was healing, and he embodied for me, and embodied in the book, the absolute sense of hope in outcome. By that I mean he was hoping for an eventuality, that he would walk, which the Army and folks at Walter Reed said was near impossible, because he didn't just lose his legs, he lost his hip. Can we see another slide, please, of his hip? The prosthetic hip, we may be able to see that. There it is. Now, that hip means that Dan could not easily sit because he had no hip or sit bones, and so he kept sliding off of chairs. But he learned how to walk with that hip 3-4 years at Walter Reed. And if we kind of continue a little bit, he soon got legs. You see him jumping. We had a picture before of him jumping, doing a free fall. And he walked, next picture, and used as a segue, and he has graduated now from Stanford Graduate School of Business. Dan, as I sort of think about in the book, is absolutely invested in an outcome. He's going to walk, and it's a plan, and it's going to get him over the hurly-burly of negative belief, if you like. He brought others in who had had similar injuries and made it through. He worked with his prostheticians. He knew everything about gait and limb and the movements of his prosthetics. It was really about planning for an outcome. But there's another kind of hope that's also critical for healing, and that's hope in persons. Dan also hoped in his team. He hoped in the prostheticists that they would sort of have the right kind of discovery and prosthetic techniques for him. He hoped in the therapist. He hoped in his remarkable family, and he hoped in himself. But for me, the real illustration, and sort of I came to work on this notion of hope in persons through a couple that I came to know through my classroom. And this is Donna and Lalo Paniagua. And I think you may have a picture of Lalo Paniagua in Marja in a mud hut, a Marine. We can bring him up. Okay, now we're getting some slides to work here. So Lalo is married to a woman named Donna, who is my student, and Lalo just embodied, he was the recipient of someone hoping in him. And it sounds hokey pokey, but the sense of having someone invest in you so that you can remember that you're capable of certain goals and that you're capable of reaching certain goals when you are suicidally depressed is critical. And Lalo, he escaped the LA barrio by joining the Marines, while his then girlfriend escaped the LA barrio by matriculating at Georgetown School of Foreign Service with choices of Stanford and Duke, and sort of a high flyer. And he's a gang kid, and his creed was, you take care of your baby birds. And the Marines just suited him to a T. You take care of your buddies, and you train them, and you take care of them, and you don't let them die on your watch. And that's not how it worked out. And so in one case that I learned about in my classroom, because he came when Donna was my student, essentially they're in MRAPs, they're setting up Marja for the surge, and someone has a pit stop. He's pretty sure he told them, watch your footing. He says that every time, but he's not 100% certain he said it this time. And his buddy, Corporal Justin Wilson, got pulverized. Now, he didn't tell anyone again for 2 or 3 years, but he carried an image of a black trash bag, which was how he stored the picked up pieces that he had to recover. And he himself did it for 4 to 6 hours. Again, a sense of strict liability. It doesn't track real culpability. It's subjective. And you could say it's not an objective wrongdoing, that it's tracking, it's not a real transgression. But for him, it felt like a transgression, and it was, he thought, an expression of not taking care of your baby birds. Goes to Quantico, he exchanges his rifle for a mouse, doesn't feel good, watches all the movements. He also was deployed to Fallujah. And after throwing Donna across the room, he finally goes to see, as he puts it, the wizard, as you folks say. But then he's accused of malingering because of all of the appointments he has to make, until finally he goes into Walter Reed to the NICO unit, National Intrepid Center of Excellence. Now, he can't go fully because guess what? This is the catch-22 that you guys are often in the grips of. Can I have the next photo? A photo of him and a dog. That's Max. And he takes his first hit, ADA, care dog, but it wasn't an ADA in the eyes of Walter Reed. He says, I've lived in huts. I'm not gonna sleep. I'm not gonna be in the barracks at Walter Reed if you won't have me and my dog. And so he goes to Vincent Hall. It's some of you may know, a retirement community in McLean, Virginia, where he's the young mascot almost, and is protected by a lot of widows. It turns out to be a healing situation. There's a silver lining, but it's a kind of funny situation. He thought he was entering an old age home when he got there because he started to see all these women, and they actually played on the water volley team. But the moral healing for him was Donna's hope in him. She never gave up the idea that he still was a Marine who was capable of the kinds of medals and honors he had actually won. And so she had him wear his dress blues and the like at various events at Georgetown. And he sort of imbibed that investment in himself. And if we can move to the next slide of Donna and Lalo. Though they were married when she was a freshman, her parents said that they never really had gotten married. And so they got remarried by a priest in a setting. And we'll move on to the next one. And here they are, a much older Lalo with a niece, and that's Donna. And she was an angel with street smarts, absolute street smarts. Many folks don't have the social wisdom and interpersonal skills that this woman does, who's, by the way, was a student of Stanley McChrystal at Yale. She went on to get a master's in foreign service. She's a member of the diplomatic corps right now. She really had hope in a person. And it sounds, as I say, like a very compared to the analytic slides we've been seeing, an uninteresting emotion. But it's an interpersonal emotion that social engagement, trust engagements, investing in a person are critical for healing. And a fact I didn't reveal earlier or mention, there are 4 million military-connected kids out there, children of you folks, who are in the schools, invisible, struggling, some of them with deployments. And they need this kind of hope in persons that is a part of moral healing. So let me finish with 2 other stories that give you a different sense of the moral emotions of healing. And this one has to do with gender discrimination. If we can now move to the slide with Air Force Major Miriam Krieger. Maybe 2 slides away. You may have to find it. We did a PBS special. Here we are. In the book, she's Roberta, but she's since given me permission to use her name. She's actually in the office of the Joint Chiefs, of the chairman of Joint Chiefs right now. But it wasn't all high flying for her. So she's a really amazing fighter pilot. But when she, all sorts of awards, had a Marshall Scholarship, studied at the LSE, London School of Economics, getting her master's. She's finishing up a PhD, Secretary of the Air Force scholar at Georgetown. But when she arrived at a post, she was essentially told, and essentially means in quotes, that the commander told her to her face that he was against her appointment, that she was disrupting the status quo and tearing down heritage and tradition. Now, this is 2011. By my calculation, 35 years after the academies went gender integrated. So this is really a sign of persistent hypermasculinity of the forces. So what's her moral injury? Resentment, to be sure, that she's wrong degraded, legally forced to work in a hostile environment. a commander not complying morally or legally with norms, but she's also disappointed, the reverse of having hope in herself. She's morally disappointed in herself for the situation she finds herself in, and disappointed in her commander, that he failed to, how to put it, meet reasonable expectations for her, that he failed as a supportive leader. He sort of, she couldn't count on him to count on her. That's a very, very profound moral transgression. It may sound like the occasion for suck it up and truck on, be resilient. But day in and day out, when you're a really competent person and you're forced to work in that kind of environment, it was absolutely debilitating. Her response was revealing. Her response was to defend herself by outgrowing the bros. She could sing louder, the worst cadences she could come across. She identified with the aggressor. She essentially took on the hostile sense that they had of her and tried to disappear in it. But after a while, she said, using Air Force term, she just felt spatially disoriented. She felt like her inner moral compass didn't match what the moral world ought to look like. And she sought help. And she also sought the intervention of a commander whom she trusted, who was able to morally address this discriminating commander in a way that he could hear. So this other guy passed a ball that her commander could catch and intervene on her behalf. I tell this story because often your own resilience doesn't get you there. You need a benevolent leader who actually sees the issue. This is moral injury. This is gender discrimination at its worst, and it's being fought slowly by Gillibrand in the Senate. Her bill isn't yet to be passed, and there's been some lying before Congress. But I don't think we should overlook this in the least. She's a star. She's in the officer, as I mentioned, an assistant to Joint Chiefs, and she's one of the Air Force's best. One more case study to reveal another aspect of moral injury. And again, I'm highlighting a woman, and I don't have her picture, but we can move to another, the slide of a woman behind the flag, if you get there. So Sally in the book was in an next one, please, in an Army base, but as an Air Force person. And she was essentially suffered moral injury by simply trying to walk through the chow line every day. All eyes were upon her. She said she was a deer in hunting season. And what she worried about was that she wasn't compassionate enough, that she felt torn constantly by knowing that she was in an all-male shop, but yet she was sexually preyed upon. And there were two incidents that might sound minor, but they made her feel more frightened inside the wire than outside. And one was that she was stalked online, and a second one was that she had her undergarments, her bras and panties, stolen while she was doing her laundry. And the challenge for her was how to raise this with command, because it seemed so trivial. And yet she was without undergarments, had to write to her mother for a strange kind of care package, and was left with a sense of, in this case, not moral disappointment, but distrust, that she distrusted her comrades who were supposed to be her supporters, and she was fearful that she didn't have an adequate cause to raise to command. And so, she struggled with the ambivalence of telling but not telling, of complaining but not airing her grievance, and an overall sense of tentative trust. Can I raise this question with you? That's not a comfortable position to be in when you're trying to do your best in a war zone. And so in this particular case, she never really resolved the trust issue till she got out of the war environment. And she ended up wearing an unconcealed knife to meals, clipped to her wallet and slung around her body. So that's moral injury that's unhealed and unresolved. And it's one we should bear in mind. It's, I don't think, trivial at all. And I think we need to remember that gender discrimination against gays, transgenders, etc., is a part of the sense of moral compromise. So let's just move to the slides of my books now. And forgive me for the inelegance of the presentation, the slide presentation. What do I think the recommendations here are? One, if we could just move to the next slide, please. Slides of my books. One is that moral injury is a real, tangible cost. We don't know how to calculate it, but we need to expose it as a real dimension of moral injury. And as a real dimension of post-traumatic stress. And militarily speaking, it is a central part of force protection. If force protection is out there with mission accomplishment and discrimination of non-combatants, so is this psychological and moral aspect of force protection. Secondly, mental health professionals really need to take seriously reports of real transgressions as well as apparent ones, could-haves and should-haves, also those of bystanders, such as the photojournalist and other journalists who really feel that they've caused damage in war by what they write and expose. And we need to be sensitive to that. There are lots of virtual techniques right now. I've been to Weill Cornell Medical School and put headsets on to deal with prolonged exposure therapy and relive the scenes. But we need to relive the combat scenes where it's not just fear, but also the moral residue of engagement in war is part of what we can relive and morally process. And that's sort of what I hope to do in my class with some of these texts that I work with. Third, everyone that's engaged with military needs to help units stay connected after war. They're not going to the VA. The VA doesn't come to you. You've got to get there, and that's a huge hurdle for many. It's huge. The systems, I know from personal experience, do not talk well to each other. The data systems don't talk well. And even getting coordination, as I'm about to do next week, between the VA and the DoD to get to Walter Reed and have an on-site visit of the creator, Melissa Walker, of those masks took about a month of my connecting and high-level people connecting. Foot soldiers don't even have that kind of access. So we need to make mental health care even more widely available without stigma and with easy access. And finally, I think we need non-clinical healing space. We certainly need to recognize traumatic brain injury. We certainly need to recognize all the warning signs of suicide. We need very good meds. We need to listen to the experts that are telling us that enclosed areas rattle the brain in a way that football injuries do not, and that the concussive disorders don't describe it all, do not describe the combat brain injuries that we're seeing right now. But we also need to understand that some of this healing is about integration in civilian life in places that are non-clinical. They could be the classroom, they could be other places in the community. They are constantly in your midst, in universities like yours, Army War College, NDU, hordes of places, community organizations, churches, temples, synagogues, mosques, etc. And we need more and better and live connections with civilian academics, integrating with the best of your folks as we're doing today. And I look forward to future discussion. My last slide is a wonderful slide of Allen Ginsberg's Howl being read by cadets at VMI, Virginia Military Institute, where he was about to arrive, and these guys are prepping for his about the moment when he appears, which is next, in their classroom. So with that, and with my inability to have any of the live feedback that makes teaching an absolute joy for me, I hope to engage with you this way. Thank you very much for your time. Forgive the tech hiccups and interruptions.
Well, thank you, Nancy, for your patience and gracefulness and dealing with the little glitches here. And we're just so happy that you could come here. I know people are wanting to interact with you and ask questions, so we'd like to open it up if that's okay, Nancy, for people
I'd love it.
To share. Okay, thank you.
Love it. Will I hear them or will I see it being written? How will that work?
Probably both. They can feel free to turn on their voice and interact, and also pose questions. Maybe I can get it started with just simply, I find it absolutely interesting about how we can prepare our leadership to recognize the moral dilemmas that they place people sometimes in their commands, and to have a little more astuteness associated with some of the not so subtle or subtle ways that people get into a situation that is just devastating. Do you have any insights that maybe from your time at West Point or other military organizations in which you could recommend for us to consider?
Sure. I think being able to think through some of this in advance is really critical. I was just with some West Point instructors that teach the ethics class. We were at a conference in England, and they lamented the fact that they have too little time, and they have one semester to teach their guys ethics, including just war theory. Being able to play some of these scenarios in advance, and also virtually is a reasonable way. Case studies are a remarkable way. I found many people, I'm very humbled to say, sort of after reading my book, some say I'm in absolute tears because this is what I faced, and this is things I couldn't say to myself or couldn't put in words. So we shouldn't underestimate how hard it is to morally process emotions that you can barely even show when you're in uniform, especially if you're commanding and you feel that you've got to keep up the demeanor and the op tempo. So anytime you can do this in advance, go through cases, the kinds that I just told you about, which are all real, I think that's really, really helpful. And also just sort of realize some of it is about losing buddies and the survival guilt that you have. Others will be about, I didn't go into it, but collateral incidents where the rules of engagement change, or you make a call and, one of my guys, one of my students gave the call to shoot, and it was a pregnant woman on way to hospital, and 3 of them died, and then he subsequently lost the 2 guys he ordered to shoot. And he himself, for 4 or 5 years, drank himself almost into death. So the more you can talk about these hard to talk feelings and prepare people in advance, whether you do it through computer means, virtual technology, or real face-to-face immersed learning with socially sensitive folks that are your chaplains or your psychologists, I think the better you are for that.
Right. I see there's some questions that have been posed in the chat log.
And I'm not following them, so if you could read them to me, I'd be grateful. Yeah, I don't see them.
It looks like there, Wingtips was saying that she was told that the number of therapists available for the VA population is ridiculously small. Are there any plans to change that, is what is being asked.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. There's a shortage in the VA. I don't know if there are plans to change that at the moment. I know the Marines have been very, very forward on this issue. They are small. They move fast. They went from something like 7 to 77. I was told by the commandant in a briefing a few months ago that I gave, between like '09 and currently. They really moved up. They also are spearheading some studies on moral injury. I would just on the subject of where to look, etc. I work from a philosophical point of view, if you like. I'm not a clinician. I'm not putting forth evidence-based therapies, but they're currently being worked on right now by a guy named Brett Litz, Litz, and Shira McGuen, Maguen, and retired Navy psychiatrist Bill Nash, Nash, and they talk about something essentially, it's really, our work really coincides. They talk about an empty chair technique. If you have, this is about regarding luck guilt or survivor injury. If the person you feel that you reproach yourself so hauntingly about were in the room, if he were there or she were there, would she point the finger in the same way you point the finger at yourself? So that's called empty chair technique or adaptive disclosure, and there are protocols that are being worked on to supplement the kind of exposure therapy for deconditioning fear that is more common these days.
There was another area that I thought relates so well to what General Goodfellow is wanting to do in the Squadron Officer College for junior officers in the Air Force. Is, he's making attempts, Nancy, to instill focused on virtues and character strengths across the curriculum and be reinforced. Do you have any insights about the ways that it matters in the profession of arms to be really deeply aware of how you can behaviorally adapt your character strengths as you think about the virtues they apply to?
Mm-hmm. I think a few thoughts here. Rules don't always give you guidance in hard situations, and so it's really complex cases that you need to think about. And General was right. Experience of those that have been there and done that and have had really hard cases, combined with conceptual tools to analyze those cases. Was it deliberate killing or was it collateral killing? Do the rules of engagement need to be shifted or are they fine? How do you feel when you say, quote unquote, my hands are tied? Or, what does it mean to respond to an idea of courageous restraint, which was General McChrystal's term for the updated rules of engagement in counterinsurgency after he took over? What does that feel like? And so I think the more cases you have where you look at that, and so it's not an empty palette. We all know we should be courageous. We all know we should be honest. But it most of the time, honesty hits in the face of courageousness. Saving lives, whose lives? The civilians, which is really, you're always supposed to save civilian lives, but at the cost of how many of your own troops? Get into that nit-grit. That's the stuff that really forces character. And I would say, obviously not everyone wants to think about those in the hardest way, but hard cases make for, they always say hard cases don't make for good law, but hard cases really make for thinking about this. Wisdom is not about reflex often. It's about a lot of reflex and a lot of subtle thinking. Also, we have to, we also just have to realize stress does terrible things to the brain and to your ability to recover. And so we really need to understand that you need commanders to keep troops in line. If they've lost a lot of folks and their vengeance meters are going off whack, they need to at least pretend that they believe in some of the engagement methods of restraint and counterinsurgency in a very believable way to be able to keep the lid on their troops. So that's a lot of social skill. It's the same kind of social skill, by the way, that I think is required when you come home. You need a squad leader who's really good at and mature at being able to feel what the rage people are feeling, and be able to keep it under control a bit without it turning into violence and abuse or or suicidal actions.
Oh, we got a couple of interesting insights and questions that came up in the text chat. We can take another question, but we also have one here I'll read to you real quick.
Please, thank you.
Why not offer, Tuja Hines says, why not offer mask therapy in virtual environments? I guess some people there that listen to your talk today are thinking some possibilities are present here.
Sure. You mean mask therapy, the making of masks? Is that what's being made? Is that? I'm sorry, for some reason I can't get an update on the.
Yeah, I guess. Tuja, do you have maybe a follow-up question? Are you thinking about it in a way that Nancy was sharing in her talk with mask therapy's applications? Yes. So.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I can't see it on my screen. I'm sorry about that. But
Okay.
yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea. It could be supplemented by portals. There are many apps out there for seeing the wizard or a shrink via a portal. As a start, it's not may not be the best way to get telemedicine, but it may be telepsychiatry, mental health is certainly very viable, and that in conjunction with real art therapy, dance therapy. I don't know enough about the virtual realities, but there are certainly ways of, I would think, creating these kinds of media, and that are very important.
Well, we hear a lot about research where awkward situations in these virtual environments that people are reporting that others are more likely to self-reveal and not worry about being overly peer evaluated. Some universities have noticed that there's much more open discussion when students can represent themselves in avatars, and we've heard that the Veterans Administration are actually looking at the same benefits of how you represent yourself in avatars may be liberating to talk about things you wouldn't otherwise talk about in the presence of someone in physical spaces.
I think that's absolutely right. The anonymity, especially in the forces, but given all sorts of circumstances, is important. And avatars could be a way in, as long as there's real helplines. I mean,
Yes.
Often there are calls of help that can be masked, and so you need to have real helplines with people. Again, I think the unit and the trust in a unit with a savvy young captain or lieutenant who's part of that, or the enlisted sergeant, is really important. So that has to be nearby, because as we heard, there are ways to abuse virtual reality as well as
Yes.
ways to be enhanced by it. And to get yourself to calm down often means a human voice. You have to hear it. Someone has to be nearby. Lalo, who we were introduced to a little while ago, had a night where he was faced with that kind of medicine cocktail that we were talking about. And he spoke to Donna, and Donna was able to reach some of the older women that live in the retirement home who came knocking on his door. And that was a rescue. So we know that you have to be able to get there too in person, even if social media, virtual realities, and other kinds of connection.
What you're sharing is there needs to be some kind of bridging between whatever that's beneficial in these virtual environments with actual access to points of help and referrals outside. This relates
Yes.
to Wingtip's question earlier that she asked, is there a referral system for lay people to get help for a hurt friend?
It's a very decentralized world. I think if a CNAS, Center for New American Security, and in particular Phil Carter, a colleague of mine who was Obama's veteran outreach guy and former Army officer, he I think put it down as 4,000 small groups out there. There are a ton, and they're very, very regional. We know some were discredited for the way they raised money. One in particular, but there are many out there, and it's and I would go to Center for New American Security and Phil Carter is their veteran guy to look at some of the listings of those groups. I don't know if they're that's the most central warehouse that I know listing some of them. Each city has their own, and they're regional.
Yes.
So.
I was kind of curious too. Where do you think the future is in our military schools and service academies for new directions and ethical development of people that are wanting to become part of the profession of arms? There's any insights you can share, Nancy, from your experiences that you think we haven't tapped into that we should pay attention to in the near future?
Well, good question. One is that in this non-conscription force we live in, it does no good to either side to silo ourselves off from each other. So think of people in camis as exotic, which is how much of many folks, even in military towns, view those in uniform. And vice versa, to have so much difficulty in reentry, reintegration, trust, coming home, I think is not very healthy. So being able somehow, especially in these base towns, which many of the military come home to and leave from, it's like the one you're in probably, integrating more with civilians is critical. I think it's the name of the game in universities. I think it's so amazing for me to see someone like Miriam Krieger at Georgetown and drone pilots at Georgetown, and my PhD is Colonel Pfaff, who just retired and was assistant to Secretary Kerry. The more they're in my world and I'm in their world, and I'm just speaking for myself, but my colleagues, I think the better we are. Producing a militia is not a good thing. We never were that, and we ought not be that. And so that's a challenge, I think, in a non-conscription force. So that's the first thing.
It is so fascinating that you share that, because our senior leaders in the Air Force have talked about something very similar to what you're recommending, with our connectiveness that we sometimes get through these meetings that you're participating today with people that normally wouldn't otherwise connect or associate with. It's so beneficial to sort of break down the misunderstandings and build some bridges to. And I think you've highlighted exactly what some of the benefits are that we're thinking about with what we're doing here.
Yes, and the Air Force, a bit like the Naval Academy, maybe a little less so than West Point, do have civilian, maybe 50% or large cadres of civilians within. And Georgetown, of course, is privileged by being in D.C., so it's a draw for all those that are Pentagon-based or continuing their career there. But I really do think it's so important but for medicine, for psychiatry, for obviously big data, that's an old story, and in the computing world, to integrate forces. You've obviously displayed that today by having 3 civilians as your keynote. So you're on board with that. Mm-hmm.
Well, we are, again, we're so very fortunate to be able to have someone. I know to come back from a trip overseas and try to get some sleep here soon. I'm hopeful that you're able to. But the fact that you hung in there with us for this period of time, and you put up with the technology glitches, and yet gave a very profound presentation, and stimulated our minds, and showed the connectiveness of what we're trying to do in our military programs, and also for many of the universities representing the people here today. Nancy, thank you so much. I think this is the start of a continued connections with you. I know for us at the Air Force Air University, we're gonna look forward to connecting with you. And I highly recommend everyone out participating to read Nancy's books. They are she has a wonderful writing style. They're very compelling stories that she's sharing that just touches your heart and mind. She references her work in very profound ways to the scholarship of, as you noticed, in how she talked about her insights. So, any last few questions for Nancy? I know this is a rare opportunity to have her here, and I hope, Nancy, we haven't scared you away.
No, I think I'm going to try to figure out how to work the deck a little better. That's all.
We will.
In terms of a collaboration, just in terms of virtual reality and PTSD, I'll have to get hold of the particular site, but the Cornell Medical School does have a lab. They work with the VA, and they do prolonged exposure technique, where essentially they put you back in a place that feels and sounds like and smells like perhaps Iraq or Afghanistan. Your chair rumbles, you hear the call to prayer, you see people walking around, etc. And the idea is old-fashioned cognitive behavioral therapy to jog your memory to things that are very hard to revisit, but to retell the story in a way that's, once you were slightly desensitized, less traumatizing. And I'd say that often is just a beginning of what I'm talking about, a place to then be calmed enough to be able to start feeling the guilt or shame or inadequacy or, frankly, impotence that many speak about. There's a terrific sense of impotence in thinking you got all these arms and all this training, and and you lose a village, or you lose your buddies and the civilians in a village, or the war doesn't end, or it feels futile. I mean, that's a very complicated feeling, and
Yes.
I'm not sure having it. You have to be able to explore that, I think, face to face. Come up with a technology where you can look into others' eyes and read faces, and I would be happy.
Yes.
I think face reading. I think my work is on emotional expression, and I'm going to start moving into dance. And I think looking at bodies and faces is really key to the deep empathy and voice mimicry, and so, or voice synchrony. So I'd be all for that kind of
absolutely. As a matter of fact,
interpersonal engagement. Uh-huh.
Matter of fact, you bring to mind how we're wanting to be so very thoughtful and reflective about what works well in these environments and what works well when you're face to face, in all the ways of emphatic understanding, because you're able to see the nonverbals and the reactions in ways. And so, but we're going to look forward to meeting you in person too, so that we can at least experience that with you.
Okay, I want to thank you all. It's a long afternoon. I don't want to detain you any longer, and thank you for bringing me into this virtual world. And I'll hope to see you again in it soon.
Well, thank you, and I think you actually swam in the deep end of the pool from today's experiences.
At least I wasn't flying. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.
And now I know we're hardy souls that are here tonight, and Dr. Cynthia Cologne and Dr. Barbara Truman have organized an in-world tour of some of the simulations, and so we can. Cynthia, do you want to take like a couple minute break 2 or 3 minutes breaks, and then we head out on the tour for folks that are hanging in there with us.
Right, yeah, because that's it. While our avatars may be fresh, our avatars probably need a little break, a refreshment. And for those of you who need to leave, please have a great weekend. Why don't we take 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll regroup here, okay?
Oh, wonderful. And thanks to everyone for coming out and